Hello and welcome. So in this video, I will be going through the entire SAT practice test number 1. For each question, I will be explaining what kind of thought processes I'm having, and hopefully that'll give you some insight into how to approach the exam and different things that you should be considering. If you haven't seen another video that I have about general SAT tips, I encourage watching that before this one. For the reading section, I will be employing a technique that I called the 10-3 approach. However, those numerical guidelines may not be followed just because I'll be explaining so many things out loud. So I won't be following any time limit. I will just be going through a full walkthrough. And with that said, let's begin with the reading section. Okay, so let's begin with the reading section. So here we are. And as you can see, I drew some lines at places where I'm going to be stopping while reading the passage, so that way we can sort of discuss what's going on. And this is a main tenet of the 10-3 approach, where you are encouraged to stop after every few lines or so and summarize yourself what's going on in the passage. So with that said, let's begin reading. I will be reading it out loud, and we'll start with the little blurb about the passage before the actual text starts. Here we go. The passage is from Lydia Minatoya, The Strangeness of Beauty. The setting is Japan in 1920. Chie and her daughter Naomi are members of the House of Fuji, a noble family. So we'll stop there, before even reading any of the text. And we already learn a lot about this passage. It might not seem like much, but we do get some good information. We gather the time period, which is the year 1920. We also gather some information about two of the characters, so we know that there's characters named Chie and Naomi, and we know that they are part of a noble family. So that's something to keep in mind as we progress through reading the passage. So let's begin reading. Akira came directly, breaking all tradition. Was that it? Had he followed form? Had he asked his mother to speak to his father to approach a go-between? Would Chie have been more receptive? So we'll stop there. And we already get some interesting information from this opening. The first line kind of provides curiosity to the reader. We're introduced to a character named Akira, and we know perhaps they're doing something out of the ordinary. Why? Because it says that Akira came directly, breaking all tradition. Interesting. So then lines 2 through 4 sort of ask some questions. We don't really know what these questions are about, but perhaps it's about an interaction between Akira and Chie, because it asks, would Chie have been more receptive? So maybe this means that Akira approached Chie about something, and Chie was not very open-minded about it. But again, we don't know too much. Also, we can sort of hypothesize that Chie is likely a character who honors tradition, and may not appreciate deviations from the norm. Maybe that's why she's not receptive, because Akira broke all tradition. And that kind of makes sense, because from the blurb, we learned that Chie is part of a noble family, so we would expect those noble people to honor traditions, perhaps. Let's continue reading. He came on a winter's eve. He pounded on the door while a cold rain beat on the shuttered veranda, so at first Chie thought him only the wind. The maid knew better. Chie heard her soft scuttling footsteps, the creak of the door. Then the maid brought a calling card to the drawing room for Chie. Let me just zoom in here so it's a little bit easier to see. But anyways, we get some more good information from these lines. So here, these lines describe the setting. We know that the weather seems to not be very pleasant. In fact, it might be so unpleasant that Chie was not expecting anybody to come to their house. That's why she thought Akira of only the wind, right? And that makes sense because it's a winter's eve and there's cold rain. So we gather some information about the setting. And we also know that Chie neglected the knock on the door for wind, like I said, but the maid knew better. The maid knew better. So that's pretty interesting. Why would that be the case? But it seems important, but we can't really make too many assumptions about this because we just don't know. But it might be helpful to keep in mind for the future. Okay, so let's continue reading. Chie was reluctant to go to her guest. Perhaps she was feeling too cozy. She and Naomi were reading at a low table set atop a charcoal brazier. A thick quilt spread over the sides of the table so their legs were tucked inside with the heat. Okay, so here we get a little bit more information about the setting. You know, we see that Chie and Naomi, they're staying warm, which makes sense, it's a winter's eve. And we learn a little bit about Naomi. Basically, we just learn that she's present in the vicinity of Chie, and yeah, so otherwise it doesn't seem too important what we learned about Naomi. Okay, so what have we learned? We've read 15 lines, but what have we learned? Briefly, we know that there's a character, Akira. He came to the residence of Chie and Naomi and a maid. The weather was unpleasant, and so Chie and Naomi were staying warm inside of their house underneath a quilt, and Chie perhaps didn't expect anybody to come to their house in such weather conditions. And that's basically all we know, but that's a lot of information from just 15 lines, so it's really good that we've been pausing and summarizing to ourselves. Let's continue. Who is it at this hour, in this weather? Chie questioned as she picked the name card off the maid's lacquer tray. Shinoda Akira, Kobe Dental College, she read. Naomi recognized the name. Chie heard a soft intake of air. I think you should go, said Naomi. This is getting exciting. So, line 16 kind of confirms our suspicions. Chie was not expecting anybody to come to the house at such a time, and, you know, she asks, like, who is it? So that's interesting. Line 20 kind of informs us that Naomi is familiar with Akira because she recognizes the name of Akira Shinoda. And maybe Naomi is surprised about Akira's presence because she took a soft intake of air. So maybe that's a point for, like, Naomi is a little bit surprised. And though it's not explicitly mentioned, perhaps we can assume that Chie does not know who Akira is. Because on line 22, it's Naomi who's telling Chie that she should go to meet Akira. So maybe Chie doesn't know Akira, but we don't know that for sure. Okay, great. Let us continue. Akira was waiting in the entry. He was in his early 20s, slim and serious, wearing the black military-style uniform of a student. As he bowed, his hands hanging straight down, a black cap in one, a yellow oil paper umbrella in the other, Chie glanced beyond him. In the glistening surface of the courtyard's rain-drenched paving stones, she saw his reflection like a dark double. So, in these lines, we gain some information about Akira. In particular, we learn about his appearance. And it seems that Akira is a very formal person. He dresses formally, wearing this black uniform. He's described as slim and serious, so we gather that he's very formal. Also, he bowed properly to Chie when he, first met her. Also, line 28 is interesting. It says, Chie glanced beyond him. What does that mean? Maybe that tells us a little bit about Chie's response to Akira. Maybe she's surprised with Akira's presence. Maybe she's a little bit upset about it. But it doesn't seem particularly happy or exciting. So that's an interesting response from Chie. Great. Next section. Madam, said Akira, forgive my disruption, but I come with a matter of urgency. His voice was soft, refined. He straightened and stole a deferential peek at her face. In the dim light, his eyes shone with sincerity. Chie felt herself starting to like him. Okay, so we get some dialogue from Akira, and that kind of supports his formal appearance. He spoke very politely. He calls Chie madam, Forgive my disruption. So very, very polite, very formal. Also, what seems very interesting is that Akira says he comes with a matter of urgency. I'm going to circle that word, urgency. This seems like it's important. We're curious to know, what is this urgency that Akira comes with? Why is he here? We've read 36 lines, and we know Akira's here, but we don't know why he's here. This is very exciting. He's coming with a matter of urgency. So it'll be very important to figure out, what is this urgency? Why is he here? Why has he shown up in such terrible weather conditions? We need to know this. Very important. Also, line 36 is interesting. Chie felt herself starting to like him. So it begins to establish a relationship between the two characters. Perhaps Chie was indeed displeased with Akira's presence when she glanced beyond him. But now she's starting to like him, so we see a little bit of character development in here. Awesome. So it feels like we're at the climax, but who knows? Let's continue reading. Come inside. Get out of this nasty night. Surely your business can wait for a moment or two. I don't want to trouble you. Normally I would approach you more properly, but I've received word of a position. I have an opportunity to go to America as dentist for Seattle's Japanese community. Congratulations, Chie said with amusement. That is an opportunity, I'm sure. But how am I involved? This is just great. So, we get some dialogue, and we learn what is this urgency that Akira is speaking of. It seems that Akira has this new job opportunity in America as a dentist, which is pretty cool. But that's kind of all we know thus far. And she seems like really confused. She's like, why are you coming here and telling me this? I barely even know you, and now you're telling me that, okay, you can go to America and become a dentist. She has no clue why he's telling him this. So this is very interesting. And this kind of confirms our suspicions from before that Chie did not know who Akira was, because maybe if she knew Akira better, she would have been aware of this. You know, she would be more receptive, perhaps not speaking in this way, but how am I involved? You know, so we're starting to gather that Chie was not familiar with Akira. But this is just great from Chie. She's just confused. Why are you telling me this? So let's figure it out. Why is Akira telling Chie this? Even noting Naomi's breathless reaction to the name card, Chie had no idea. Akira's message, delivered like a formal speech, filled her with maternal amusement. You know how children speak so earnestly, so hurriedly, so endearingly about things that have no importance in an adult's mind? That's how she viewed him, as a child. Ooh, very interesting. So the first few lines kind of confirms the suspicion that Chie is not familiar with Akira. It says Chie had no idea. So we're almost confident that she didn't know who this guy was. But by the end of this little section that we just read, we learn Chie's interpretation of Akira. You know, she appreciates his speech and demeanor. He's, delivered like a formal speech. But she thinks of him only as a child. So now the relationship between them is very, it's hard to tell what is it actually. She has a very strange approach to Akira. She thinks of him as a child, but Akira is speaking so formally towards Chie. But still, we have yet to learn what is this matter of urgency. We just know that Akira is coming, or he has come here to tell her of the job opportunity, but we don't know why. It seems to not have anything to do with Chie. Onwards. It was how she viewed Naomi. Even though Naomi was 18 and training endlessly in the arts, needed to make a good marriage, Chie had made no effort to find her a husband. Okay, so we gain a little bit more information about Naomi. Right now we didn't really know too much about her, but we learn Naomi's age. We know what she's working on, and that perhaps she's looking to be married, but Chie has not really helped that much in that department. So, great, we know a little bit about Naomi. Still, we need to figure out the urgency. Let's go. Akira blushed. Depending on your response, I may stay in Japan. I've come to ask for Naomi's hand. Suddenly, Chie felt the dampness of the night. Does Naomi know anything of your ambitions? Ooh. So, he's come to ask for Naomi's hand. What does that mean? Well, it seems that Akira wants to marry Naomi, and he has come to ask Chie if he can marry Naomi. So maybe that is the urgency why he's here. So what can we say about Chie's response? Honestly, not too much. We just have the one dialogue, but line 60 says, suddenly, Chie felt the dampness of the night. Why is that included? Well, we don't really know, right? But it's interesting how the word dampness is used. Perhaps that implies that Chie's initial reaction was solemn or not full of joy, because why would the author use the word dampness if Chie was suddenly very excited about this offer? So maybe we're thinking Chie is not too excited about Akira right now. But let's continue. We have an understanding. Please don't judge my candidacy by the unseemliness of this proposal. I ask directly because the use of a go-between takes much time. Either method comes down to the same thing, a matter of parental approval. If you give your consent, I become Naomi's Yoshi. We'll live in the house of Fuji. Without your consent, I must go to America to secure a new home for my bride. Great. We finally understand the urgency. Akira, he seems to really need to know soon whether or not he will go to America. It seems that either if Chie says yes, you can marry Naomi, he'll stay in Japan, otherwise he has to go to America, and he needs to know soon. Also, he apologizes for not using a go-between because it takes too much time. So perhaps that's a reference to the start of the passage, the opening line, where it said, Akira came directly, breaking all tradition. But it also seems that Akira might fear that Chie may deem him inappropriate due to his proposal, because he says, please don't judge my candidacy by the unseemliness of this proposal. So that's something he fears. And great, so we finally understand the urgency. Now, we really want to see what is Chie's reaction to all of this. Will she let him marry Naomi? Will she not? Let's figure it out. Eager to make his point, he'd been looking her full in the face. Abruptly, his voice turned gentle. I see I've startled you. My humble apologies. I'll take no more of your evening. My address is on my card. If you don't wish to contact me, I'll reapproach you in 2 weeks' time. Until then, good night. He bowed and left, taking her ease, with effortless grace, like a cat making off with a fish. Okay, so we learned that Akira has really good awareness. He sensed that perhaps he was being a little too eager, and he apologizes to Chie. Also, what's interesting is that he had been looking her full in the face. And if you remember a few lines ago when he was bowing to Chie, he took a peek at Chie's face. So very different. And then we learned that if Chie does not contact Akira, then Akira will come back in 2 weeks. He gives information to Chie on how to contact him if she does decide to contact him. But I really want to focus on lines 77 and 78. A very, very interesting, set of lines here. Let's reread it. He bowed and left, taking her ease, with effortless grace, like a cat making off with a fish. Perhaps it feels as if Chie is a little bit stunned or experiencing some stress or anxiety because he took her ease. Maybe? It's kind of hard to tell. Let's continue. So, here we go. Mother, Chie heard Naomi's low voice and turned from the door. He has asked you? The sight of Naomi's clear eyes, her dark brows gave Chie strength. Maybe his hopes were preposterous. Okay, So, line 79 to 80 indicates that Naomi was well aware of why Akira came to the house. Because he questions Chie, he has asked you. So perhaps she was expecting Akira to come and ask if Naomi can marry him. So it is interesting how Naomi was aware of this, but Chie was not whatsoever. And we also see that Naomi is sort of a symbol of strength for Chie. Okay, where did you meet such a fellow? Imagine, he thinks he can marry the Fuji heir and take her to America all in the snap of his fingers. So, at this point, it seems that Chie is not taking Akira very seriously. She believes that maybe the family is too noble for a man like Akira to just abruptly disrupt and, marry Naomi. So she doesn't seem particularly enthusiastic about this. But let's finish it up. Chie waited for Naomi's ripe laughter. Naomi was silent. She stood a full half-minute, looking straight into Chie's eyes. Finally, she spoke. I met him at my literary meeting. Naomi turned to go back into the house, then stopped. Mother, yes, I mean to have him. Alright, so Naomi does not have the same opinion as Chie. Chie was sort of joking around about this, wasn't taking the offer very seriously, but Naomi seems to be quite serious about the marriage, and that's supported by the very last line, I mean to have him. Alright, so that's the passage. We read it very carefully, and that's how you should be approaching these passages if you use the 10-3 approach. Read very carefully, pause, and summarize yourself. So now we'll move on to the questions, and as you can see, I've covered them up, and this is a technique that I proposed in the video where you read the questions, formulate your own idea, and then reveal the answers and choose the best one. So this first question, which choice best describes what happens in the passage? It's a very vague question, and that's okay. We can still kind of formulate our own answer. So if we were to quickly summarize this, we would say that there's a character, Akira, who abruptly shows up at a house of two characters, being Chie and Naomi, and essentially Akira asks Chie if he can marry Naomi. And Chie is quite surprised by this request. And that's basically what happened. So let's just take a look at the answers. So choice A, one character argues with another character who intrudes on her home. So I guess the keywords here are argue and intrudes. So that didn't exactly match what we said, but let's look at the other answers. One character receives a surprising request from another character. So that does make a little bit of sense. We did say that Chie was surprised by Akira's request to marry Naomi, so that does seem like a promising answer. Surprising request. Let's look at C. One character reminisces about choices she has made over the years. That does not match what we said at all, and it doesn't make any sense. So we're not going to choose C. In fact, let's just cross it out. And D. One character criticizes another character for pursuing an unexpected course of action. Let's highlight some words. Criticizes for pursuing an unexpected course of action. That also doesn't make too much sense, because who's criticizing who in this passage? No one was really criticizing anybody. There was very little dialogue, and no one really pursued an unexpected course of action. We know that Akira was considering pursuing marrying Naomi. He was considering to move to America or stay in Japan, but he didn't do any of these things. He just came to their house. So choice D, I also don't really like it. There's no criticism, really. So we're between A and B, and if you think about it, B is the best answer. A doesn't make sense because there isn't an argument that takes place. The key word is argues in here, and there is no argument. So we're going to go with B. Cool. Next one. Which choice best describes the developmental pattern of the passage? Well, we don't really know how to answer this without looking at the answers, so let's take a peek at what the answers say. So A, a careful analysis of a traditional practice. Careful analysis of a traditional practice. That doesn't seem right. Why? Because the first line says that Akira broke all tradition. So I'm not feeling too great about A. Well, let's look at B. A detailed depiction of a meaningful encounter. I mean, I can see this, right? That is basically the entire passage, the encounter between Akira and Chie and, Naomi, I guess. So that seems good. Let's just check the other answers. C, a definitive response to a series of questions. Definitive response to a series of questions. I know I'm highlighting basically all of the words, but it's just to emphasize, the parts of the answer choices. First of all, a series of questions. There wasn't many questions in the passage. There was very little dialogue, so the amount of questions, maybe there were a few, so maybe it could be right, but a definitive response. Did we ever get a definitive response? No, we didn't. Because Akira asked, can I marry Naomi? Chie was like, what? And then Akira was like, nah, okay, I'm being a little too eager, let me go home, and then you can, contact me later. So C does not feel right. D, a cheerful recounting of an amusing anecdote. What? Cheerful and amusing. At any point when we were reading it, did we ever pause and say, yes, this feels very cheerful? No, in fact, we paused on words that were, not very cheerful. In particular, dampness. We talked a lot about that, and there were a lot of apologies. So I'm not feeling too great about D. So that basically leaves us with choice B, and that makes the most sense. So we'll go with B. Cool. As used in line 1 and line 65, directly most nearly means. So this one, we will not look at the answer choices. Let's go back to the passage and formulate our own guess. So, line 1, Akira came directly, breaking all tradition. Okay, so that's fine. Let's look at line 65 though. I asked directly because the use of a go-between takes much time. Okay, so what are we thinking? Maybe we're thinking like a good synonym would be straightforwardly or like without any interruption, something along those lines. So let's take a peek. What are our answer choices? A is frankly, that doesn't make too much sense. B is confidently, also doesn't make too much sense. C is without mediation. That kind of follows what we said of straightforwardly without any interruption, so feeling good about that. D is with precision. That doesn't seem good, so we'll go with C. And yeah, that should be right. Cool. Alright, let's move on to question 4. Which reaction does Akira most fear from Chie? Okay, so let's see. We remember that when Akira proposed his idea to Chie, that he wants to marry Naomi, he started talking and then he realized he was too eager. And then what did he say in his apology? Let's see. Here we go. No, sorry. Here we go. Before he apologizes, what does he say? Please don't judge my candidacy by the unseemliness of this proposal. So he's kind of telling her how she shouldn't be feeling. So perhaps that is what he is fearing from her. So we know Akira has broke tradition and he wants to act properly in front of Chie. And he is asking for Chie's permission to marry Naomi. So let's just look at what our answers are and let's see. So she will consider his proposal inappropriate. Okay, that seems okay. Maybe it's right. Let's look at B. She will mistaken his earnestness for immaturity. I don't know, because if we remember those lines, please don't judge my candidacy by the unseemliness of this proposal. It's not really immaturity. We already know that Chie interprets Akira as a child. She mentioned that, but it was never the case that Akira was concerned that Chie would interpret him as immature. So maybe not B. Let's take a look at C. She will consider his unscheduled visit an imposition. Again, if we remember those lines about please don't judge my candidacy, blah blah blah, that doesn't really talk about his visit. It was never really mentioned what Akira thought about the time he was visiting, so maybe not C. And she will underestimate the sincerity of his emotions. That just doesn't make sense. Akira never really feared about his emotions at all, so that seems quite out of the ordinary. So B seems to make sense, A seems to make sense, but if we remember B, that was about the immaturity, so A is probably the correct answer. Alright, moving on. Which choice provides the best evidence for the answer to the previous question? Okay, well, let's look at the answer choices. Line 33. His voice ... refined. Let's see. His voice was soft, refined. And that's not very good support, is it? That's just describing his voice, so I'm not feeling too great about choice A. Choice B, 49 to 51, you ... mind. You know how children speak so earnestly, so hurriedly, so endearingly about things that have no importance in an adult's mind. That's sort of like the narrator speaking, if anything. It's not really anything from Akira or Chie, it's just describing Chie's interpretation of Akira. So I don't really think that supports our answer of she will consider his proposal inappropriate. So that doesn't seem right either. 63 to 64. Please don't judge my candidacy by the unseemliness of this proposal. Well, that seems pretty good, doesn't it? Because that's the line we were fixating on. But let's just check the last answer, 71 to 72. Eager to make his point, he'd been looking her full in the face. Again, that's sort of the narrator talking. There's nothing explicitly mentioned in there. We can kind of gather some assumptions from those lines, but we don't want to assume anything. And considering choice C were the lines that we did care about the most, I'm going to go with answer choice C. Cool. Let's move on to question 6. In this passage, Akira addresses Chie with what? Well, let's think about what our answer could be. We mentioned many times how Akira was acting very formally and respectfully in front of Chie. He apologized at the appropriate time, he spoke with respect, he bowed in front of her. Everything was very formal and respectful. So let's see if any of the answer choices match what we said. A. Affection but not genuine love. I don't think there was ever really any moment of affection. If anything, we never gathered any love emotions throughout it, so I'm not feeling great about that. Objectivity but not complete impartiality. I don't think that's correct. It could be correct. Objectivity is a very strange word to describe how he addresses a person, but let's just move on. C. Amusement but not mocking disparagement. Again, amusement, no, he always spoke with respect, so I'm not feeling great about amusement. And if we look at choice D, it says respect. So I'm feeling pretty good about D. B could be correct, but D definitely seems like the way to go. And that is the answer I'll go with. Cool. Number 7. The main purpose of the first paragraph is to... Let's just go back to the first paragraph. Let's reread it. Akira came directly, breaking all tradition. Was that it? Had he followed form? Had he asked his mother to speak to his father, to approach a go-between? Would Chie have been more receptive? Okay, so it's interesting. It's sort of like a flashback, but the flashback occurs at the beginning of the story about what the rest of the story is. And when we first read the paragraph, we tried to hypothesize what Chie's response actually was to Akira. And we thought that, Chie honored tradition, but we didn't know Chie's reaction to Akira. So, with this in mind, let's kind of think about what the answers could be, but let's reveal the answers. It's to describe a culture. I don't think that's a really great idea. I don't really think that's a great answer. It wasn't really a description of the culture. We know that there's a mention of tradition, that Akira broke tradition, but it doesn't really describe culture. We didn't learn too much about Japanese culture from that. B, criticize the tradition. Was there any criticism? No, it was just sort of asking questions, like Akira asking questions to himself about Chie. So I don't really like the word criticism. Let me just highlight that. And I'll highlight culture. C is question a suggestion. Okay, so there were a lot of questions in there, but none of them pertain to a suggestion. It was more of how Akira how he acted. So it could be correct, but I don't really like it because it says suggestion. That doesn't make too much sense. And D is analyze a reaction. And I feel like that's a really good answer, because when we read that, we were curious about what Chie's reaction actually was, and the questions were about Chie's reaction. Would she have been more receptive? So I really like D, and I think that's the correct answer. Okay. As used in line 2, form most nearly means... Okay, well, let's look at line 2. Had he followed form, had he asked his mother to speak to his father, to approach a go-between, would Chie have been more receptive? So form is paired with the word followed form. But we also know that he broke all tradition. So he broke all tradition, and now he's questioning if he should follow form. So we think that the word form has something to do with tradition. So perhaps he's trying to replicate the tradition as best as possible. He's considering what would have happened if I did follow that tradition. And also knowing Akira's character, perhaps it has something to do with formality. We don't know. Let's just take a look at the answers. Choice A, appearance. No, we didn't really say that at all, and it's not really a synonym for anything we said, so I don't feel too great about that. B, custom. Now that feels good. That's a synonym for tradition. He broke all tradition, he broke all customs. We can kind of see that. Had he followed all customs? I like that. Structure. You might think that this is correct, and it can be tricky, but structure more has to do with how something is built, how maybe a building, something physical is built, or how a plan is built. It has good structure, right? But this is more talking about the tradition. There's not much of structure involved. So maybe we could twist our way into thinking that C is correct, but if we remember choice B, B seems much better than C. And D is nature. Again, for similar reasons, it could make sense, but compared to answer choice B, I don't think it's correct, so we'll go with B. Alright, question 9. Why does Akira say his meeting with Chie is a matter of urgency? Well, it's a good thing that we paused throughout the passage to question about what the urgency was. We know what the urgency was. He'd been offered a job in another country, and he needs to figure out where he's going to live, and he wants to figure out if he can marry Naomi. Let's look at the answers. He fears that his own parents will disapprove of Naomi. What? No. Were at any point was Akira's parents mentioned? No. They weren't even a focus of the entire passage. So in fact, I'm just going to cross it out because I'm so sure it's not correct. Choice B. He worries that Naomi will reject him and marry someone else. Marry someone else. The only time this was potentially mentioned was when Naomi was initially introduced, saying that she's 18, studying the arts, and that perhaps she was looking to marry someone, but Chie had not done much to help her with that. So it was never mentioned what Akira thought about Naomi's rejection. There wasn't any hypotheses of Naomi marrying someone else. So again, I'm not feeling too worried about this one. I could cross it out, but I won't. C. He has been offered an attractive job in another country. Well, that seems to hit the nail right on its head. Attractive, well, maybe that's an over-exaggeration, but still, C seems really, really good. Let's look at D. He knows that Chie is unaware of his feelings for Naomi. I mean, maybe that's true. It was never explicitly mentioned, but even if that were true, I don't think that outperforms C, because remember, it's asking why is he saying it's a matter of urgency? He needs to figure out where he's living. C matches what we predicted the answer would be. Let's go with C. And last question for this passage. Which choice provides the best evidence for the answer to the previous question? Okay. Let's see. Line 39, and then choice B is lines 39 to 42. So we'll look at both of those. Here we go. I don't want to trouble you. That's choice A. No. Is that support for why he comes with a matter of urgency? I don't want to trouble you. No, that doesn't have anything to do with his job or anything like that, so I'm not feeling too good about A. Let's look at B, which was 39 to 42. Normally, I would approach you more properly, but I've received word of a position. I have an opportunity to go to America as dentist for Seattle's Japanese community. Well, that seems pretty good, right? He's talking about his job. He says he has an opportunity to go to America. I'm really liking that. But let's check the other two answers. 58 to 59 and 72 to 73. So 58 to 59. Depending on your response, I may stay in Japan. I've come to ask for Naomi's hand. Okay, now that's interesting. It is interesting. It could be correct. But this is more focused on the marriage between Naomi and Akira, whereas the previous lines of support, choice B, was focused on the job. And our answer to question 9 was about Akira's job. So, this is very tricky. You might be tempted to choose this answer, but we shouldn't choose it, because B seems to make a lot more sense. It's talking about the job. And lastly, D was 72 to 73. My humble apologies, I'll take no more of your evening. That should be pretty clear that that's not the right answer. It's definitely not better than B. So we will go with the answer choice B. And that's the end of the first passage. So let's move on to the second passage. Okay, let's get started with the second passage. And as you can see, I kind of put less markings of where we'll stop, so it won't be as many pauses as normal. But let's begin, and as always, we'll start with the little blurb at the start of the passage. This passage is adapted from Francis J. Flynn and Gabrielle S. Adams' Money Can't Buy Love, Asymmetric Beliefs About Gift Price and Feelings of Appreciation, and 2008. Okay, we get some good information from this, actually. We learned that, the passage is most likely going to talk about asymmetric beliefs about gift price and feelings of appreciation. So what does that mean? Well, maybe the author thinks that this asymmetry exists, and higher gift prices don't symbolize higher feelings of appreciation. Maybe that's what we're starting to think, but we have to read to figure it out for sure. Let's begin. Every day, millions of shoppers hit the stores in full force, both online and on foot, searching frantically for the perfect gift. Last year, Americans spent over $30 billion at retail stores in the month of December alone. Aside from purchasing holiday gifts, most people regularly buy presents for other occasions throughout the year, including weddings, birthdays, anniversaries, graduations, and baby showers. This frequent experience of gift giving can engender ambivalent feelings in gift givers. Many relish the opportunity to buy presents because gift giving offers a powerful means to build stronger bonds with one's closest peers. At the same time, many dread the thought of buying gifts. They worry that their purchases will disappoint rather than delight the intended recipients. Okay, that is a ton of information. So what have we learned? Okay. We learned that, Americans spent over $30 billion in the month of December alone. That seems kind of important. And also there's multiple times where gift giving occurs, weddings, birthdays, anniversaries, etc. So many, many different instances there. However, let's focus our attention on lines 9 to 10. These seem kind of important. This frequent experience of gift giving can engender ambivalent feelings in gift givers. So this is like the first line where we're relating gift giving and feelings, and the little blurb at the top of the passage talked about the asymmetry between gift giving and, feelings of appreciation. So these two lines seem kind of important. But we might not know what certain words like engender and ambivalent mean, but that's okay. We can gather some relevant information in the lines that follow, though. And we see that there are some people that enjoy the process of gift giving, and they look forward to it because it strengthens bonds, to build stronger bonds with one's closest peers. But then there are others that don't like the gift giving process because they worry that their purchases will disappoint rather than delight the intended recipients. So we see two types of people for the most part, and what their feelings are. Cool. Let's move on to the second paragraph. Anthropologists describe gift-giving as a positive social process, serving various political, religious, and psychological functions. Economists, however, offer a less favorable view. According to Waldvogel, 1993, gift-giving represents an objective waste of resources. People buy gifts that recipients would not choose to buy on their own, or at least not spend as much money to purchase, a phenomenon referred to as the deadweight loss of Christmas. To wit, givers are likely to spend $100 to purchase a gift that receivers would spend only $80 to buy themselves. This deadweight loss suggests that gift givers are not very good at predicting what gifts others will appreciate. That in itself is not surprising to social psychologists. Research has found that people often struggle to take account of others' perspectives. Their insights are subject to egocentrism, social projection, and multiple attribution errors. Okay, again, a monster paragraph. So, let's go to the beginning. Anthropologists, they're pretty smart people. They think that gift giving is a positive social process, and it has many different functions. Economists, on the other hand, who are also smart people, don't think so. They have a less favorable view. Okay, so we see two different groups of people have two different opinions on this. And in this case, those who think that gift giving is not good and thinks that it's a waste of resources and that people are buying gifts that the recipients would not choose. That's said right there. And then also we learn that there's a deadweight loss. Right here, it's introduced, a deadweight loss of Christmas involved, and that's involved with purchasing gifts. Also, what did we learn? That in itself, is not surprising to social psychologists. So what is not surprising? This deadweight loss is not surprising. to social psychologists. So that's very interesting. Also, we learned that people often struggle to take account of others' perspectives. So, people aren't very good at predicting what others would like. We're not very good at seeing other people's perspectives. Okay, wow. Lots of information. Let's move on to paragraph 3. What is surprising is that gift givers have considerable experience acting as both gift givers and gift recipients, but nevertheless tend to overspend each time they set out to purchase a meaningful gift. In the present research, we propose a unique psychological explanation for this overspending problem, i.e., that gift givers equate how much they spend with how much recipients will appreciate the gift. The more expensive the gift, the stronger a gift recipient's feelings of appreciation. Although a link between gift price and feelings of appreciation might seem intuitive to gift givers, such an assumption may be unfounded. Indeed, we propose that gift recipients will be less inclined to base their feelings of appreciation on the magnitude of a gift than givers assume. Okay, again, this is a lot of lines at once. And I decided to chunk it by paragraphs, and that's not always a great idea. Maybe to have 2 or 3 breaks in between each paragraph would be good, but I'm just showing another way of approaching these reading passages where you pause less frequently, but as you can see, when we pause, there's a lot to go through. And in this case, it's no different. Let's go to the beginning of this paragraph. So, what's interesting, at the beginning, it says, well, what is surprising is that gift givers, they've been in the position of gift givers and gift recipients, but they still tend to overspend. So gift givers have been in both positions, but still overspend. So that is quite surprising, right? Okay, what's next? And then towards the middle, towards the end, we sort of gain insight into what's going on here. Like the author brings up this like hidden psychological point that the more expensive the gift, the stronger a gift recipient's feelings of appreciation will be. And that's in parentheses here, right? So that seems to be like the main point of the passage. Again, we're seeing this comparison between gift giving, the price of gifts, and feelings of appreciation. And that's, the main idea that we gathered from the little blurb at the start. Also, the author says that this assumption about the expense of gifts may be unfounded, and the recipients are less inclined to base their feelings on appreciation on the magnitude of a gift. Okay, what does that mean? So, basically they're saying gift recipients don't really care about how big a gift is, but the gift givers think that the larger a gift is, the better. The more expensive it is, the better. So there we're starting to see the asymmetry that I was talking about. Gift givers assume something, but these gift recipients don't have that belief. Let's move onwards. Why do gift givers assume that gift price is closely linked to gift recipients' feeling of appreciation? Perhaps givers believe that bigger, i.e. more expensive gifts convey stronger signals of thoughtfulness and consideration. According to Kammerer, 1988, and others, gift giving represents a symbolic ritual whereby gift givers attempt to signal their positive attitudes toward the intended recipient and their willingness to invest resources in a future relationship. In this sense, gift givers may be motivated to spend more money on a gift in order to send a stronger signal to their intended recipient. As for gift recipients, they may not construe smaller and larger gifts as representing smaller and larger signals of thoughtfulness and consideration. Okay, so this kind of seems to pose the question of why do gift givers have this association between the magnitude of a gift, and feelings of appreciation. And that question is brought up at the very start. So it seems like this paragraph was trying to solve this question, right? And then, so here, the author mentions this Kammerer person and others, okay? So Kammerer, they're referenced given a year, they're probably some sort of esteemed figure, and others. So we think that whatever information follows, it's a widely held belief. It's held by Kammerer and others. So what is this belief? It's that gift giving represents a symbolic ritual. So they're saying it's symbolic, and gift givers attempt to signal their positive attitudes towards the intended recipient. So they're saying that, okay, for gift givers, gifts act as a symbol. It's showing positive attitudes. And then it says at the very end here that gift recipients don't necessarily correlate smaller and larger gifts with the magnitude of thoughtfulness and consideration. And that's said at the very end here. So here we sort of get an answer as to the psychological reasons behind the thought process. And then we see again that the author mentions that it's not really held true in gift recipients. They don't really have that association. And let's finish it off with the last paragraph, I believe. The notion of gift givers and gift recipients being unable to account for the other party's perspective seems puzzling because people slip in and out of these roles every day, and in some cases, multiple times in the course of the same day. Yet despite the extensive experience that people have as both givers and receivers, they often struggle to transfer information gained from one role, e.g. as a giver, and apply it in another, complementary role, e.g. as a receiver. In theoretical terms, people fail to utilize information about their own preferences and experiences in order to produce more efficient outcomes in their exchange relations. In practical terms, people spend hundreds of dollars each year on gifts, but somehow never learn to calibrate their gift expenditures according to personal insight. Okay, so what's that saying? At the beginning, they're saying that people are so often switching between roles of gift givers and gift receivers. They even say maybe multiple times in the course of the same day we're switching roles. But what's the issue? What is the issue that the author is trying to convey? They're saying even though we switch roles all the time, we don't use the information that we learn in roles when switching to the other role. And that says right here, despite the extensive experience, blah, 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 they often struggle to transfer information gained from one role and apply it in another complementary role. So that's the issue right here. We know as gift receivers that we don't really care about the size of the gift necessarily, but when we act as the giver, we forget about that information. So that's very, very interesting. And that's summarized in lines 75 to 78. In theoretical terms, people fail to utilize information about their own preference and experiences in order to produce more efficient outcomes in their exchange relations. Alright, that's a lot of information, but we did a really good job of analyzing the passage, stopping when needed, and really analyzing what the passage was saying. With that said, let's move on to the questions. But first, they provide us a graph. Let's take a look at the graph quickly. So it's titled Givers' Perceived and Recipients' Actual Gift Appreciations. So on the y-axis, it's measuring the mean appreciation. So we'll assume that a higher score means that there's more appreciation. So as a giver, they perceive that a less expensive gift will have a mean appreciation of 5.5, and a more expensive gift will have a mean appreciation of 6.2 maybe. So that makes sense, because the passage was saying givers think that more expensive gifts will be more appreciated. But as the recipient, we see that less expensive gifts have a mean appreciation of about 6, and more expensive gifts are slightly less than that. So again, that's showing that recipients don't really care about the expense of the gift when it comes to appreciation. Cool. Let's go into the questions. And as before, I covered up the answers, so sometimes we will have to reveal the answers, but sometimes not. So 11, the authors most likely use the examples in lines 1 to 9 of the passage, every ... showers, to highlight the, well, let's look at lines 1 through 9. So that's saying millions of shoppers hit the store. Last year, Americans spent over $30 billion in December. Aside from purchasing holiday gifts, most people regularly buy presents for other occasions throughout the year, including weddings, birthdays, anniversaries, graduations, and baby showers. Okay, so it seems like they're talking about how many people shop very often, and there's a lot of gift giving that occurs throughout the year, not just in the holiday season of December, but, other occasions that, happen throughout the year. So we don't really have a great answer, but we kind of know what to be looking for. Alright, let's look at the answer choices. A, to highlight the regularity with which people shop for gifts. Okay, that seems possible. Seems like a pretty good answer. That's kind of what we were talking about. B, to highlight the recent increase in the amount of money spent on gifts. The keywords here are recent increase. It did talk about, last December, Americans spent $30 million or however much it was. But there was no comparison to a previous time. So we don't know if it increased. Maybe it did decrease. Let's just go back and look. Last year, Americans spent over $30 billion, but it doesn't mention anything else. Maybe the year before, Americans spent $100 billion in December alone. So we don't know that for sure, and pretty much that means it's wrong, because we don't know. C, to highlight the anxiety gift shopping causes for consumers. Okay, this one's tricky, because at the end of the first paragraph, it talks that many dread the thought process of buying gifts. That is said right here, right? However, the question asks about lines 1 through 9, and those lines don't necessarily relate to this anxiety mentioned. So, we're thinking that that is also the wrong answer. And D, to highlight the number of special occasions involving gift giving. That's tricky. That seems like it's also correct. So we're kind of stuck between A and D. Alright. So, what do we do here? Let's go back to the passage. Are there any lines that particularly stick out? Well, here's one. Most people, let me highlight it, most people regularly buy presents for other occasions throughout the year. And that's something we really talked about, that it happens throughout the year. So that's really talking about the regularity. It proposed that in December there was a high spending, but also throughout the year, people still shop for gifts. It happens regularly. It's not really talking that, there's so many different times where gift giving occurs, but rather the examples were to show that, for example, baby showers, weddings, they can occur at any point throughout the year. It happens regularly. So this is a really tricky question, but we're going to go with A. Cool. Question 12. In line 10, the word ambivalent most nearly means, if you remember, I said that, maybe we don't know what the word ambivalent means, but let's just take a look at line 10. This frequent experience of gift giving can engender ambivalent feelings in gift givers. Many relish the opportunity to buy presents, and then it continues to talk about how some people like buying presents because it builds stronger bonds, but other people dread buying gifts. So that's a really, really big hint, because those are feelings that gift givers have. So ambivalent, maybe that means like a contrast, different opposing things, because it shows a contrast, those who like giving gifts and those who don't like giving gifts. So, let's see if any of the answer choices help support what we're thinking. A is unrealistic. No, that doesn't make too much sense, really. B, conflicted. Now that I like that, right? Conflicted, contrasting, different. That feels pretty good. C, apprehensive. That's not really a great word to describe feelings. I mean, I suppose it's a fine word, but in this context, it doesn't make too much sense, especially when we were seeing the contrast of feelings, right? And D is supportive. No, that doesn't make much sense either. So I feel really good about B, and it's supported by the information that followed the word ambivalent, of the contrasting opinions of gift giving. Question 13. The authors indicate that people value gift giving because they feel it. Well, okay, we just talked about this, and we just looked at it. What was it? It was something like people who enjoyed giving gifts thought that it strengthened bonds in their relationships, right? So, let us take a look. A, functions as a form of self-expression. No, not really self-expression. There wasn't any discussion of how gifts express what someone is feeling. No. B is an inexpensive way to show appreciation. So the word appreciation, that's interesting, but inexpensive is also there. And we didn't really talk about the expensive gifts. We did, but inexpensive is sort of comparing it to other things, right? We didn't really cover the price of gifts, the numerical values, how expensive they are to other things. So that's not the greatest answer. C, requires the gift recipient to reciprocate. No, that didn't really match what we were thinking it would say. And D, can serve to strengthen a relationship. That's what we predicted the answer would be, and that seems to be the best answer. Question 14. Which choice provides the best evidence for the answer to the previous question? Okay, well, either we can look at the answers and then look at the passage, or we can look at the passage and then look at the answers. In this case, I'm going to reveal the answers just so that way we're looking at lesser lines. So let's look at 10 to 13, and then we'll go to 22 to 23. So line 10, many relish the opportunity to buy presents because gift giving offers a powerful means to build stronger bonds with one's closest peers. That seems pretty good. That does seem pretty good. But let's look at the other choices. 22 to 23. People buy gifts that recipients would not choose to buy on their own, or at least not spend as much money to purchase. Okay, so that doesn't really support our answer, because it doesn't make as much sense as the first choice. Let's just look at the last two choices, 31 to 32 and 44 to 47. So line 31. Research has found that people often struggle to take account of others' perspectives. Again, that doesn't really give us evidence as to why people like giving gifts. So that doesn't make sense. And 44 to 47, although a link between gift price and feelings of appreciation might seem intuitive to gift givers, such an assumption may be unfounded. So that talks about gift givers in general, doesn't really talk about why they like giving gifts, so it really does seem that A is the best answer. Alright, 15. The social psychologists mentioned in paragraph 2 would likely describe the deadweight loss phenomenon as... Alright, this is a good question. We paused when we talked about the deadweight loss, and we highlighted something. Let's see. The deadweight loss suggests that gift givers are not very good at predicting what gifts others will appreciate. That in itself is not surprising to social psychologists. Great. So we see social psychologists think that deadweight loss is not surprising. So we would look for an answer choice that supports that idea. A, would describe the phenomenon as predictable. Okay, maybe. B, questionable. No, we don't really have any evidence that would support that. C, disturbing. No. D, unprecedented. Maybe, but it really seems that A is the best, because we said the social psychologists thought that it's not surprising. It's predictable. So we'll go with choice A. Alright, 16. The passage indicates that the assumption made by gift givers in lines 41 to 44 may be, okay, well, let's look at lines 41 to 44. And this is a really good thing here. The question says the passage indicates. When you see those kind of words, it's a really good idea to go back to the text. Don't just rely on what you thought it was. Really go back to the lines and analyze them, because the word indicates might make it seem that the answer is not explicitly mentioned, and we would really have to analyze the lines. So let's look at lines 41 to 44. Maybe read a little bit around it. So starting at 39, in the present research, we propose a unique psychological explanation for this overspending problem, i.e. that gift givers equate how much they spend with how much recipients will appreciate the gift. The more expensive the gift, the stronger a gift recipient's feelings of appreciation. Although a link between gift price and feelings of appreciation might seem intuitive to gift givers, such an assumption may be unfounded. Indeed, we propose that gift recipients will be less inclined to base their feelings of appreciation on the magnitude of a gift than givers assume. Okay, so what are we thinking? I think it's best to just look at the answers. We can sort of make an assumption, but since it is sort of an assumption, it's best to look at the answer choices and decide. So, maybe insincere? No. Unreasonable? Again, maybe, because they're saying that this assumption isn't true, but it's not unreasonable, because that would be saying that the assumption is like way out there and it doesn't make much sense. It's unreasonable. C, incorrect. That seems quite good, because that's what the passage is describing. D, substantiated. No, not as good as choice C. Great. Moving onwards. 17. Which choice provides the best evidence for the answer to the previous question? Let's look at the choices. 53 to 55, that's followed by 55 to 60, so let's look at those lines. 53 to 55. Perhaps givers believe that bigger, i.e. more expensive gifts convey stronger signals of thoughtfulness and consideration. Alright. I don't feel too great about those lines. 55 to 60. According to Kammerer and others, gift giving represents a symbolic ritual whereby gift givers attempt to signal their positive attitudes towards the intended recipient and their willingness to invest resources in a future relationship. Okay, well that's more talking about the symbolism of gift giving, right? That's not talking about how the gift giver's assumptions is incorrect. Let's look at the other choices. We have 63 to 65 and 75 to 78. 63 to 65. Ooh, it's interesting how we boxed them out. As for gift recipients, they may not construe smaller and larger gifts as representing smaller and larger signals of thoughtfulness and consideration. That seems really good. That's showing that the gift recipients don't hold that belief, and there isn't much of a correlation between the two quantities. I think the last two are 75 to 77. In theoretical terms, people fail to utilize information about their own preferences and experiences in order to produce more efficient outcomes in their exchange relations. So that's kind of talking about how when we switch roles, we don't really use the information we learn. So I don't feel too great about that line. It really does seem that C is the best answer. Alright, 18. As it is used in line 54, convey most nearly means, well, let's take a look at line 54. Perhaps givers believe that bigger, more expensive gifts convey stronger signals of thoughtfulness and consideration. Alright, So what are some words that could be used in place of convey? Maybe like indicate, bigger gifts indicate stronger signals of thoughtfulness and consideration. Represent, show, these are some pretty good synonyms that I think would fit. Let's look at the answers. Transport. Okay. Transport, maybe, right? We might think that, okay, maybe, but transport is really talking about movement of things, like physical movement. When you think, I'm going to transport this from one place to another, you really think about like cars maybe, or trucks. That's like what I think about. Vehicular transportation. B, counteract. I don't think that really matches what we were saying. So that wasn't a synonym with any of the other choices we had. C, exchange. Maybe you can think that to be true, but an exchange, again, that's more of a physical exchange, a verbal exchange. So maybe, but we'll see. Choice D, communicate. That seems pretty good. I said indicate, represent, show, communicate, although that does have to do with, verbal words, dialogue. Communicate can also be used with physical aspects. So D is our answer. 19. The authors refer to work by Kammerer and others in order to... Okay, we did pause, and we did think about Kammerer and others. And we said, okay, Kammerer seems like a smart person. They were referenced with the year, I think it was like 98 or something like that. And others. So we thought, okay, maybe it was to show like some widely held belief that a lot of people had. And then what did Kammerer talk about? They talked about the symbolism of gift giving. And that was that people think that larger gifts represent more thoughtfulness. It was a symbol for them. So it was sort of like an explanation of an incorrect correlation. So let's look at the answers. To offer an explanation, that seems pretty good, right? It's explaining why people have this correlation between larger gifts and higher feelings of appreciation, why gift givers think that, and it's explained through the symbolism. B, introduce an argument. No, not really though, because what was the argument that was introduced with the symbolism? Was it that, gift givers think that more expensive gifts garner higher amounts of appreciation? No, not really, because that's been proposed since the start of the passage, really. So, not really. C, question a motive. Again, it's not really questioning anything. It's providing an explanation. Why do gift givers actually have this thought in them? D, support a conclusion. This could be tricky, right? It is providing support of why there is that idea, but that idea is not a conclusion. It's just an observation. So with that said, A is the best idea. It's offering an explanation of why do people have this association. Question 20. The graph following the passage offers evidence that gift givers base their predictions on how much a gift will be appreciated on... Okay, this one's a little tricky to do without the answers, so let's take a look at the answers. But before we do that, let's just take a quick look at the graph. So this is talking about gift givers, how they base their predictions on how much a gift will be appreciated on. So gift givers, we saw that more expensive gifts they thought would be more appreciated, less expensive gifts would be less appreciated. And if we look at the answers, it's asking about what appreciation is measured on. That's the expense of the gift. They think that more expensive gifts will be more appreciated. So we're looking for an answer about the expense, how much it's worth, and that's choice B. Alright, last question. Oops, not yet. The authors would likely attribute the differences in gift giver and recipient mean appreciation as represented in the graph to, Okay, well, before revealing the answers, we remember at the end of the passage that the authors were talking about givers and recipients have a difficult time like switching perspectives. Even though we switch roles a lot, we don't really learn from each other's roles, and that causes the incorrect correlation. So let's look at the answers. A, an inability to shift perspective. That's exactly what we said, so that seems right. B, an increasingly materialistic culture. No, never really talked about culture as a whole. C, a growing opposition to gift giving. Again, not really discussed any like movement to slow down gift giving, so no. D, a misunderstanding of intentions. No, not as good as choice A. And there we go, that concludes the second reading passage. Okay, so let's begin with the third passage, and as always we will start with the little prologue, the blurb at the top. This passage is adapted from J.D. Watson and F.H.C. Crick, Genetical Implications of the Structure of Deoxyribonucleic Acid, 1953, by Nature Publishing Group. Watson and Crick deduced the structure of DNA using evidence from Rosalind Franklin and R.G. Gosling's X-ray crystallography diagrams of DNA and from Erwin Chargaff's data on the base composition of DNA. Okay, so we learned that the passage is probably going to be talking about DNA and maybe talking about the base composition of it, maybe something about X-rays and stuff like that, but we have a good start of what to expect. So let's begin with the first paragraph. The chemical formula of deoxyribonucleic acid, DNA, is now well established. The molecule is a very long chain, the backbone of which consists of a regular alternation of sugar and phosphate groups. To each sugar is attached a nitrogenous base, which can be of 4 different types. 2 of the possible bases, adenine and guanine, are purines, and the other 2, thymine and cytosine, are pyrimidines. So far as is known, the sequence of bases along the chain is irregular. The monomer unit, consisting of phosphate, sugar, and base, is known as a nucleotide. Okay, so we'll pause and let's see what we learned. I think this first paragraph does a really nice job of introducing us to DNA, and it gives us a lot of definitions and some background about DNA. So we learn that the backbone of the DNA consists of a regular alternation of sugar and phosphate groups. I think the key word is regular, and it alternates back and forth. That makes sense. Also, we learned that sugars are connected to a nitrogenous base and that there's 4 different types of nitrogenous bases. And then, of these 4 nitrogenous bases, it breaks down into purines and pyrimidines. So we have adenine and guanine are purines, and thymine and cytosine are pyrimidines. So that's right here. Cool. And then an interesting line is line 9, which says, so far as is known, the sequence of bases along the chain is irregular. Okay, so maybe the rest of the passage is going to be talking about whether or not these bases are actually irregular or not, but the keywords are so far as is known. So that seems like it's the current state of belief, and maybe, we'll learn something different about it. Let's move on to the second paragraph. The first feature of our structure, which is of biological interest, is that it consists not of one chain, but of 2. These 2 chains are both coiled around a common fiber axis. It has often been assumed that since there was only one chain in the chemical formula, there would only be one in the structural unit. However, the density, taken with the X-ray evidence, suggests very strongly that there are 2. Okay, so now we're talking more about the shape of DNA. And we learned that there's 2 chains coiled around an axis. And it's important to recognize that there was a widely accepted assumption, and that comes from the lines where it has often been assumed that there was only one chain due to the one chain in the chemical formula. That's what it says. But now we know that it's not true. So they presented a widely accepted assumption, and now they're saying, no, that's not true. There's two chains because of this X-ray evidence. So that's like the counter evidence of why the claim is not true. Cool. Paragraph 3. The other biologically important feature is the manner in which the two chains are held together. This is done by hydrogen bonds between the bases. The bases are joined together in pairs, a single base from one chain being hydrogen bonded to a single base from the other. The important point is that only certain pairs of bases will fit into the structure. One member of a pair must be a purine and the other a pyrimidine in order to bridge between the two chains. If a pair consisted of two purines, for example, there would not be room for it. Okay. So in this paragraph, the author is talking about like how the two chains are held together, and that is done by hydrogen bonds, right? And we also know what kind of bases need to be paired together in DNA. We know that a purine must be paired with a pyrimidine, and that two purines, there would be no room for it. So now we see, okay, two chains, each one has these nitrogenous bases, they're hydrogen bonded together, and they must be of a certain pair, so that way they fit together, and there's room for it. Okay, next paragraph. We believe that the bases will be present almost entirely in their most probable forms. If this is true, the conditions for forming hydrogen bonds are more restrictive, and the only pairs of bases possible are adenine with thymine and guanine with cytosine. Adenine, for example, can occur on either chain, but when it does, its partner on the other chain must always be thymine. Okay. So, they're saying that if their hypothesis is correct, then there's only two pairs that could possibly happen. The only nitrogenous base pairs are adenine with thymine and guanine with cytosine. So let me underline that because that seems quite important, right? And they also say that, okay, these bases can appear wherever on the chain. The only thing that matters is that on the other chain, they have the correct counterpart. For every adenine on one chain, its direct correlated part must be thymine. They must be hydrogen bonded together. Alright, moving on to paragraph 5. The phosphate sugar backbone of our model is completely regular, but any sequence of the pairs of bases can fit into the structure. It follows that in a long molecule, many different permutations are possible, and it therefore seems likely that the precise sequence of bases is the code which carries the genetical information. If the actual order of the bases on one of the pair of chains were given, one could write down the exact order of the bases on the other one because of this specific pairing. Thus, one chain is, as it were, the complement of the other. And it is this feature which suggests how the deoxyribonucleic acid molecule might duplicate itself. Alright, so we learned that we can have any sort of permutation of the nitrogenous bases on one chain. It's perfectly fine, whatever order, it's good. The other chain needs to be the complement of it. So the complement in this case means that the counterparts must match. And they're basically saying, well, if we have one chain, we can figure out the other one. If we see adenine on one chain, well, we know that it must be paired with thymine. Okay, so that's interesting. And then towards the end, they're saying, what can we do with this information? Well, it might suggest how deoxyribonucleic acid might duplicate itself. So that is something interesting to note. So let's take a quick look at this table. The table shows for various organisms the percentage of each of the 4 types of nitrogenous bases in that organism's DNA. So let's see. If we look, we see maize, octopus, chicken, etc. and then the percentage of each nitrogenous base, adenine, guanine, cytosine, and thymine. So let's see, is there anything interesting we can gather from this? And there are some things. Let's look at maize. So adenine is 26.8, and if we look across to thymine, which is adenine's pair, it's 27.2, so they're quite similar. And similarly, guanine is 22.8% and cytosine is 23.2%. And we remember that those are the pairs, and they do, they're pretty similar numbers. And if we look at, let's see, the sea urchin, the same thing, 32.8% for adenine, 32.1% for thymine, 17.7 for guanine, and 17.3 for cytosine. So even though the numbers in these two rows are different, within each pair, guanine and cytosine, the numbers are very similar to each other. So what does that tell us? That tells us that there's probably very similar amounts of each pair, each element of each pair, but this supports the claim from before that the permutation doesn't matter. We can have however much adenine we want, as long as the amount of thymine matches it. Cool. And then we see this is adapted from Manju Bansal, DNA structure, revisiting the Watson-Crick double helix. Alright, let's move on to the questions. And as always, I black them out, but some of them we'll have to look at them. The author used the word backbone in lines 3 and 39 to indicate that, okay, well, let's look at line 3. The molecule is a very long chain, the backbone of which consists of a regular alternation of sugar and phosphate groups. Okay, so here, backbone, they're talking about what it's made out of, and we boxed the word regular. So, okay, that's fine. Let's look at line 39, which is here. Adenine, for example, can occur on either chain, but when it does, its partner on the other chain must always be thymine. The phosphate sugar backbone of our model is completely regular, but any sequence of the pairs of bases can fit into the structure. So again, we see the word regular here. Alright, so that seems like it's going to be a part of an answer. If they gave us two lines and the same word appeared both, we're thinking that the answer has something to do with it being regular. So let's take a look at the answers. Okay, so to indicate that only very long chains of DNA can be taken from an organism with a spinal column. Wow, that is quite absurd. We didn't even talk about spinal columns at all, if I remember it. So I don't think A is the right answer. It just doesn't seem right. B, the main structure of a chain in a DNA molecule is composed of repeating units. Okay, so that makes sense, right? Because line 3 talked about the regular alternation. So alternate, it goes back and forth between, the sugar and the phosphate group. So that seems pretty good. C, a chain in a DNA molecule consists entirely of phosphate groups or of sugars. Okay, so it's talking about the molecule, phosphate group, and sugar, both are there. That makes sense. So that could be it. And D, to indicate that nitrogenous bases form the main structural unit of DNA. Not really. It's not really talking about the nitrogenous bases at this point. It's more of the sugar and the phosphate group. So let's eliminate choices A and D. So now we're between B and C, and this can be really tricky. In this case, C is not the correct answer. It's very tricky to see this. A chain in a DNA molecule consists entirely of phosphate groups or of sugar groups. So, line 3 told us that there's a regular alternation of sugars and phosphate groups, meaning they're both present and they alternate back and forth. The wording of C says that a chain is either only phosphate groups or only sugars. So a little bit of tricky wording there, but that makes C incorrect, and our answer is D. Alright, 23. A student claims that nitrogenous bases pair randomly with one another. Ooh, which of the following statements in the passage contradicts the student's claim? Okay, let's not look at the passage just yet. we can think of like what we want to look for. And we should remember at some point early on that we were told that a purine must be paired with a pyrimidine. And later we were given information adenine with thymine, cytosine with guanine. So let's look at the answer choices and see if any of them prompt us to choose that area. So 5 to 6 and 9 to 10, those are A and B. So 5 to 6, to each sugar is attached a nitrogenous base, which can be of 4 different types. No, that doesn't really give us any good indication to anything. 9 to 10, so far as is known, the sequence of bases along the chain is irregular. Okay, so that's talking about the sequence. It's not really talking about how they pair, so maybe not that either. So C is 23 to 25, and then D is 27 to 29. So 23, the bases are joined together in pairs, a single base from one chain being hydrogen bonded to a single base from the other. Okay, so now we're talking about how they're paired. But here we're only talking about that, okay, they're hydrogen bonded, but it's not talking about purines and pyrimidines. So I'm not feeling too great. 27 to 29, one member of a pair must be a purine and the other a pyrimidine in order to bridge between the two chains. Perfect, that's exactly what we were looking for. So that's what we're going to go with, the answer choice of D. Cool. Okay, 24. In the second paragraph, lines 12 to 19, what did the authors claim to be a feature of biological interest? Okay, so since we read carefully, we should remember that the second paragraph discussed how, there was a widely accepted belief that DNA was only one strand, but due to, the X-ray technology and the evidence, it was determined that there's two chains. So, let's see if any of the answer choices support that. A, the chemical formula of DNA. No, didn't really talk about the formula too much. B, the common fiber axis. I think that was mentioned, but it wasn't really focused, and it's not of biological interest. We didn't really care about the axis, we cared more about the chains. C, the X-ray evidence. Okay, well, yeah, maybe. That was something that we mentioned. But let's look at D, DNA consisting of two chains. And that's basically it. The X-ray evidence was used to support the DNA being two chains, and that was the feature of biological interest. So, that's D. 25. The author's main purpose of including the information about X-ray evidence and density is to... Okay, well, let's see. We kind of just talked about this. The X-ray evidence was used to show that there's two chains of DNA. So, hopefully that's an answer choice. Let's see. A, establish that DNA is the molecule that carries the genetic information. That's not really what we said, so maybe not. B, present an alternate hypothesis about the composition of a nucleotide. That's also not what we predicted. C, provide support for the author's claim about the number of chains in a molecule of DNA. Okay, that seems really, really promising. D, confirm the relationship between the density of DNA and the known chemical formula of DNA. We talked a little bit about the chemical formula. They said that it was widely accepted that there was one chain because there was one chain in the chemical formula, but we didn't really see any relationship with that and density. So I feel really confident about C. That's what we predicted, so that's what I'll go with. 26. Based on the passage, the author's statement, if a pair consisted of two purines, for example, there would not be room for it, implies that a pair... Okay, let's just go back because it says the word implies, so let's see what they were talking about. So line 25, the important point is that only certain pairs of bases will fit into the structure. One member of a pair must be a purine and the other a pyrimidine in order to bridge between the two chains. If a pair consists of two purines, for example, there would not be room for it. So we can imagine there being two chains, right? and there's these little blobs in between each chain, and if one is a purine and one is a pyrimidine, they fit perfectly. But if they're both purines, it's too large, and there's no space in between the two chains. So that's sort of what we're gathering from this. Let's take a look at the answer choices. So it implies that a pair of purines would be larger than the space between a sugar and a phosphate group. Okay, that seems interesting. B, that a pair of purines would be larger than a pair consisting of a purine and a pyrimidine. Now that seems a lot better, right? Because they said a purine and pyrimidine can fit, but two purines would be too large. There would not be enough room for it. So I'm really liking B. C, that a pair of pyrimidines would be larger than a pair of purines. We didn't really talk about pyrimidines. We could make some assumptions, but we can't do that. Everything we should be answering should be found in the text. So since the text does not talk about a pair of pyrimidines, we shouldn't make any assumptions. D implies that a pair consisting of a purine and a pyrimidine would be larger than a pair of pyrimidines. Again, they're talking about a pair of pyrimidines. That's not talked about in the text, so I'm not comfortable choosing that. That means that B is our answer. Oops. Cool. 27. The author's use of the words exact, specific, and complement in lines 47 to 49 in the final paragraph functions mainly to... Okay, well, let's read these lines. I'll read from 45. If the actual order of the bases on one of the pair of chains were given, one could write down the exact order of the bases on the other one because of the specific pairing. Thus, one chain, as it were, the complement of the other. Okay, so what does that mean? Again, that's talking about how if we had one chain, we could basically figure out that the other chain, we know what the ordering is. Also, line 51 talks about how deoxyribonucleic acid duplicates itself, and that's due to how one chain is the complement of the other one. So, maybe the answer has something to do with duplication. And if we look, choice A confirms that the nucleotide sequences are known for most molecules of DNA. No. Remember, it was talking that for DNA, it can be a random permutation of the nucleotides. So I don't like A. Functions mainly to counter the claim that the sequences of bases along a chain can occur in any order. Again, that does not make any sense, right? Because they can occur in any order. That's what they said. C functions mainly to support the claim that the phosphate sugar backbone of the author's model is completely regular. Also, I don't really think it was talking about the phosphate sugar backbone. That was a little earlier on. D emphasize how one chain of DNA may serve as a template to be copied during DNA replication. Now that seems good. At the end, they were talking about DNA replication. I like that answer. 28. Based on the table and passage, which choice gives the correct percentages of the purines in yeast DNA? Okay, well, let's look at the table. So, yeast is this row, but first, what are purines? Purines are adenine and guanine. So, what are the percentages of adenine and guanine? Well, 31.3 and 18.7. So, hopefully that's an answer choice. And, let's see, choice C has 31.3 and 18.7, which is exactly what we were looking for. Cool. 29. Do the data in the table support the author's proposed pairing of bases in DNA? Okay, well, we kind of already answered this when we looked at the table, but let's look at the table again. Here we said that guanine and cytosine are very similar in numbers, so we expect there to be an equal amount of them, and adenine and thymine are of equal amounts, so there should be an equal amount of them in the structures. And if we look back at the passage, they were talking about how the pairs are basically determined right here. Adenine with thymine and guanine with cytosine. So the table does support it. We see equal amounts in those pairs. So we expect the answer to be basically yes. So we see that A and B say yes, C and D say no, so we'll eliminate C and D. So A, yes, because for each given organism, the percentage of adenine is closest to the percentage of thymine, and the percentage of guanine is closest to the percentage of cytosine. That's basically what we concluded, so I feel good about that. Let's just take a look at B. Yes, because for each given organism, the percentage of adenine is closest to the percentage of guanine, and cytosine to thymine. No, we know that's not right, so A is our answer. 30. According to the table, which of the following pairs of base percentages in sea urchin DNA provides evidence in support of the answer to the previous question? Okay, that is a lot. So the previous question, we said that adenine is close to thymine and guanine is close to cytosine, and we're looking at sea urchins. So sea urchins, that's the one we highlighted in green actually. So we said that 17.7 and 17.3 are very similar, and 32.8 and 32.1 are very similar. So we're looking for one of those pairs, right? Because that would show that, yes, these amounts are very similar. It supports the answer. And if we look at the answers, A is one of the pairs. Also, we can just look and see that, okay, B, C, and D, the percentages are very different. They're very similar to each other in answers, but they're very different numerically. And that just doesn't support the previous question at all. So we probably could have answered this without consulting the table, but you should. You should consult the table. Alright, last question. Based on the table, is the percentage of adenine in each organism's DNA the same, or does it vary? And which statement made by the authors is most consistent with that data? Okay, so let's look. Adenine, that's this first column here. And we see that, okay, the numbers seem to be mid to high 20s to low 30s, but it's not consistent throughout. We do see that here, 29.3, 29.3, those are similar, but everything else, it's different. And, well, what statement does that support from the author? Well, we remember that they said that many different permutations are possible. So that is supporting it, because there's different amounts of adenine, there's different permutations in each organism. So hopefully that will show up as an answer choice. So, well, let's see. If we look at the answer choices, A and B say that it's the same, which we said it's not. So between C and D, let's look at the lines, 36 to 38 or 41 to 45, okay. 36 to 38 says, adenine, for example, can occur on either chain, but when it does, its partner on the other chain must always be thymine. So that is talking about adenine, but that's more focusing on its pair. It's partnered with thymine. It's not talking about how often it's presented. And then the other one, I forgot what lines they were. 41 to 45, okay. It follows that in a long molecule, many different permutations, okay, are possible, and it therefore seems likely that the precise sequence of bases is the code which carries the genetical information. Okay, so we underlined many different permutations. It's in the lines given. Choice C didn't make sense, so we go with D. And that's the end of the third passage. Okay, so let's get started with this fourth passage, and we'll read a little bit about it. This passage is adapted from Virginia Woolf, 3 Guineas, 1938 by Harcourt, Inc. Here, Woolf considers the situation of women in English society. Okay, so first of all, a lot of students really dread this passage. And usually in the SAT, there's always one passage which is from a period long ago, 100 years ago, 200, maybe even more than that. And for these passages, it's very important to read very, very closely. And you can see that I put stopping marks much more frequently than I did for like the past 2 passages. Anyways, so what did we learn from this little bit about the passage? We kind of learned the author's motive for writing the passage. It seems that, she's reflecting on the situation of women in English society. So it's going to be important for us to figure out what her stance on the issue actually is. We have the context, we just need to figure out the stance. So, again, I will read this out loud, and remember, pay attention. It can be really hard to pay attention during these passages, but if you need to reread, you can do that too. Here we go. Close at hand is a bridge over the River Thames, an admirable vantage ground for us to make a survey. The river flows beneath, barges pass, laden with timber, bursting with corn. There on one side are the domes and spires of the city, on the other, Westminster and the houses of Parliament. It is a place to stand on by the hour, dreaming, but not now. Now we are pressed for time. Now we are here to consider facts. Now we must fix our eyes upon the procession of the sons of educated men. Okay, so what's going on here? First 2 sentences, and they're quite long sentences, they kind of set the setting, and we can visualize what's going on here because Virginia Woolf does a great job of providing so much imagery. We can imagine a bridge over the River Thames. We know on one side there's a city, on the other is Parliament. And lines 6 through 8 mention how, normally it's a good place to stand and just dream, maybe to watch, but not at the current time. That's really important here. But not now. Okay? So, what does that mean? Maybe we're gathering a sense of urgency again. A sense of urgency. We gather it, but not now. We need to figure out, what is this urgency? What does the author consider to be so urgent? And it seems that the author is concerned about the procession of the sons of educated men. That seems to be related to what's so urgent. But again, we don't really know too much about it. So yeah, first 11 lines, we gain some imagery, and we gather a sense of urgency. Okay, moving onwards. There they go, our brothers who have been educated at public schools and universities, mounting those steps, passing in and out of those doors, ascending those pulpits, preaching, teaching, administering justice, practicing medicine, transacting business, making money. It is a solemn sight always, a procession, like a caravanserai crossing a desert. But now, well, I won't read that part, we'll just stop there. Okay, so now the author, Woolf, she's explaining how she sees these brothers, like the men at the procession, and how they're now entering adulthood or the workforce. Now they're ascending those pulpits, preaching, teaching, administering justice. And she mentions that they have been educated at public schools and universities. So right now she's very focused on the brothers who are part of the procession. So now they're moving on to much more grander things. But what's interesting about this? What does she say about this procession? She says it's a solemn sight as always. Okay, so what does that tell us? That happens that this procession happens very often, but it's solemn. So again, the author's not particularly excited about it. Solemn isn't an adjective that induces incitement, so it's a little bit sad, on the sad side of it. But why? Well, let's try to figure that out. But now, for the past 20 years or so, it is no longer a sight merely, a photograph or fresco scrawled upon the walls of time, at which we can look with merely an aesthetic appreciation. For there, trapezing along at the tail end of the procession, we go ourselves, and that makes a difference. Okay. It might not seem like much, but I think these lines are really, really interesting. And so we said that, okay, the procession is a solemn sight as always, so we said it happens quite often, and she mentions that, it's been occurring for the past 20 years or so. But now here's what I'm really curious about. It says, line 22, at which we can look with merely an aesthetic appreciation. Who's we? Who is we referring to? It's kind of hard to tell. She just throws in this pronoun. We kind of have to figure out who is we. And it might be difficult to tell right now. Maybe we need to read a little bit more, but maybe we can make an assumption. What did we read at the very start? We said that Woolf considers the situation of women in English society. And we know Virginia Woolf is a woman, so is we talking about English women? Maybe. So that is something to keep in mind. But what is this we doing? We go ourselves. They're going with the procession. So whoever this we is, they're going with the brothers through this procession. Great. We really need to figure out who we is, though. Okay, let's continue reading. We who have looked so long at the pageant in books, or from a curtained window watch educated men leaving the house at about 9:30 to go to an office, returning to the house at about 6:30 from an office, need look passively no longer. Okay, so now we gain a little bit more clarity of who the we is. We get a lot of qualities about this we because the author enumerates them. Have looked so long at the pageant in books, from a curtain window, and then they say that we've watched educated men leave the house and then return to the house. So it's really starting to seem that our assumption of who the we is correct. It is most likely referring to the women, English women. And that's because the author, consistently brings up the men, and that's kind of contrasted from the we. Okay, cool. Let us continue. We too can leave the house, can mount those steps, pass in and out of those doors, make money, administer justice. We who now agitate these humble pens may in another century or two speak from a pulpit. Nobody will dare contradict us then. I'll stop there, but we'll continue reading that sentence at the next stopping point. But anyways, here we go. We too can leave the house. Okay, so now it's really feeling like it is English women who are we. Why? Because who else is in the house with the men who leave the house to go to work? Well, it's probably their wives, the English women. And in the author's eyes, well, what is she saying? She's saying if men can leave the house and go to work, then so can women. Women can also make money and administer justice. We can do that too. That's what she's saying. So, line 33 says, we who now agitate these humble pens. What does humble pens mean? Maybe it means their homes? I'm not really sure. But that is an interesting word choice, maybe just something to keep in mind for later. And so maybe the author is saying, we may be currently at home, but in some years, they say in another century or two, they can be doing the same work that the men are doing. Speak from a pulpit. They will also be working hard. Okay, let us continue, and I'll start from line 34. Nobody will dare contradict us then. We shall be the mouthpieces of the divine spirit. A solemn thought, is it not? Who can say whether, as time goes on, we may not dress in military uniform, with gold lace on our breasts, swords at our sides, and something like the old family coal scuttle on our heads, save that that venerable object was never decorated with plumes of white horsehair. Okay, so what do we get from this? Well, it says nobody will dare contradict us then. So maybe that means that currently, at the current time, there is a group contradicting them, whatever contradict means. It might take on a different meaning in this context. But perhaps maybe there's some group that's yielding the women's progress. And then the author believes that in time, these women will have enough power such that this is not an issue. We may not dress in military uniform with gold lace and all of that imagery right there. Okay, let's continue. You laugh. Indeed, the shadow of the private house still makes those dresses look a little queer. We have worn private clothes so long, but we have not come here to laugh, or to talk of fashions, men's and women's. We are here on the bridge to ask ourselves certain questions, and they are very important questions, and we have very little time in which to answer them. Okay, wow. So, let's go back a little bit to the beginning of this section. The first word is you. Another pronoun, and we don't really know who it's referring to. Who is you? Maybe we can guess who you is. Maybe it is the men, since the pronoun we was about, the author and English women. You could be the men or those who are currently contradicting the women. Because she's saying, you laugh, and then she continues to speak about how women can eventually get power. And towards the end of this section, let's go back up here. We are here on the bridge to ask ourselves certain questions, very important questions, and we have very little time in which to answer them. Again, this sense of urgency is brought back. There are these questions, and we have to answer them. That's the urgency. We need to answer these questions. But what are the questions? Maybe the author needs to be a little bit more specific, but let's read. The questions that we have to ask and to answer about that procession during this moment of transition are so important that they may well change the lives of all men and women forever. For we have to ask ourselves here and now, do we wish to join that procession or don't we? Wow. Okay. So, in this section, I feel like the author is talking to the we, the women. That's the questions that we have to ask. Are we going to join the procession? Are we not going to join the procession? And so, that's kind of the main thing of this section here, that women need to make the decision now whether or not they want to join that procession, or, well, if they don't join the procession, probably continue with the norm. And I think the key word here is transition. So the author feels that this is a very important moment, it's a huge transition, it can change the lives of all men and women forever. And that's what's so urgent. Now is the time to act. Okay. On what terms shall we join that procession? Above all, where is it leading us, the procession of educated men? The moment is short. It may last 5 years, 10 years, or perhaps only a matter of a few months longer. But you will object, you will have no time to think, and we'll continue with that sentence later. But okay, what's going on here? Now the author's questioning the procession. At first she was like, okay, there's this procession, if we join it, we have the chance of changing men and women forever. But now she's like, on what terms are we going to join the procession? Where is it leading us? Is she doubting it? Maybe. What's also curious is how the author is questioning how long this moment is. 5 years, 10 years, a few months longer. So that ties into the sense of urgency. She doesn't know how long this moment will last. That's why she's saying, let's do it now. Let's make this decision now. Okay. But you will object. You have no time to think. You have your battles to fight, your rent to pay, your bazaars to organize. That excuse shall not serve you, madam. As you know from your own experience, and there are facts that prove it, the daughters of educated men have always done their thinking from hand to mouth, not under green lamps at study tables in the cloisters of secluded colleges. They have thought while they stirred the pot, while they rocked the cradle. Alright. So now, what is the author doing? She's anticipating the counter-argument here. She's anticipating that the women will say, oh, we're very busy, we have things to do, battles to fight, rent to pay, bazaars to organize. And what does the author say? She says, that's not an excuse. That excuse shall not serve you. She's saying, no, it doesn't matter. That's not an excuse. She also mentions how women have done work under different circumstances than men. You know, she says, men have been able to use these green lamps at study tables in cloisters of secluded colleges. But what did women have to do? They had to think while stirring the pot, rocking the cradle. They had these obligations to do, yet they still thought the same way that men did. Wow, this is getting really interesting here. Okay, let me just erase this line, it's in the way. Okay, let's continue. It was thus that they won us the right to our brand new sixpence. It falls to us now to go on thinking, how are we to spend that sixpence? Think we must. Let us think in offices, in omnibuses, while we are standing in the crowd watching coronations and Lord Mayor's shows. Let us think. In the gallery of the House of Commons, in the law courts, let us think at baptisms and marriages and funerals. Okay, so the first question we might be having is, what is a sixpence? What is a sixpence? If we're familiar with currency, you might know that a pence is a unit of currency. So is it like a coin or something? I don't really know, but it is important to underline this. We come across a word, we don't really know what it means, but we can kind of think. You know, the sixpence falls to us now to go on thinking, and then we spend the sixpence by thinking. Think we must. Okay, that doesn't really give us resolution as to what a sixpence is, but we have some things to relate it to, which is good. So what else is the author saying? She's saying, okay, we'll think, but where are we going to think? In offices. Watching coronations. Let us think in the gallery of the House of Commons and law courts and all of these prestigious places. Not from home anymore. In the House of Commons. Great. Okay, let us finish off this passage. Let us never cease from thinking. What is this civilization in which we find ourselves? What are these ceremonies, and why should we take part in them? What are these professions, and why should we make money out of them? Where, in short, is it leading us, the procession of the sons of educated men? Alright, so here, the author, I feel like she's encouraging women to never stop thinking. Let us never cease from thinking. And she concludes this passage by doing what? Well, she asks a bunch of questions. And that's something that I feel has been quite predominant throughout the passage, asking questions. And, well, what are these questions? They're kind of questions about information she's already brought up. What are these professions? She kind of talked about that already. Why should we make money out of them? So she's providing women with these questions to think about and sort of questioning some stuff she's already presented. But all in all, she's encouraging women to always to continue thinking, never stop from thinking. Brilliant. Let us now answer the questions. So as you can see, that was a tough passage. The English was a little bit strange, but it was filled with details, and it was really hard to parse out what was necessary. But I think we did a good job. Hopefully these questions will be helpful. Okay, so let's get started with the questions. Question 32. The main purpose of the passage is to... Okay, well, let's think about the answer before we look at the answer choices. So what's going on? The author, if we had to summarize this very quick, the author is talking to English women, and she's encouraging them, persuading them to quickly begin thinking about their place in society. She's saying that men are working in all these positions. We too, as women, can also work just like the men do. And what's important about this passage, what did we say many times? There's a sense of urgency. The author feels that this issue is urgent. She doesn't know how long it's going to last. 5 years, 10 years maybe just a few months. So there's that sense of urgency. Let's take a look at the answers and see if anything matches what we said. Okay. To emphasize the value of a tradition. Well, okay, what's the tradition? I don't know. It might be hard to tell. And maybe they're saying that the tradition is the procession that was discussed. So, okay, let's say that the tradition is the procession. But was this passage talking about the value of a procession? In my opinion, no. She was saying that there is this procession taking place, but we as women have a choice whether or not to join the procession. I don't think the passage really focused on the value of this tradition, the value of this procession. So I don't feel very good about choice A. B, to stress the urgency of an issue. I really like this. The word urgency is in there. We talked about how the author thought this issue was urgent. And what's the issue? Whether or not women will join this procession. So I feel really good about choice B. C, to highlight the severity of social divisions. Okay, this one's a little bit tricky. What are the social divisions? We can make some sort of assumption, but it's not very good to make assumptions in the reading section. So I'm already not feeling good about choice C, but let's say we do. Let's assume that the social divisions are that men have like these great positions in jobs and women aren't yet a part of that. That's a social divide. But is she really highlighting the severity of this? Is she talking about the consequences of this division? No. She's more saying that, okay, there is this division, but we don't have to have this division. We can obtain the same jobs, do the same thing that men do. So, again, I don't feel really good about choice C. And the keywords are here, severity and divisions. D, question the feasibility of an undertaking. Okay, this one's interesting. The word question is in there. And there were a lot of questions throughout the passage. She did question a lot of things. But was she questioning the feasibility of an undertaking? Well, what could the undertaking be? Perhaps taking all of these steps to be on the same footing as men, have those same jobs. Is she questioning the feasibility? In my opinion, no. Why? If we look back just a little bit, the last few lines, she asks a lot of these questions. What are these ceremonies and why should we take part in them? What are these professions and why should we make money out of them? So there she's questioning the professions, but she's not questioning whether or not women can get these professions. In her opinion, they can, and she said that. We can have these same professions. So it's not questioning the feasibility of the undertaking. There are a lot of questions, but D is not the correct answer. So we'll go with choice B. Alright, moving onwards. 33. The central claim of the passage is that... Okay, very vague question, but let's try our best to answer it without looking at the answers. So we've said that, the author thinks that women must decide quickly whether or not they want to continue living their usual lifestyles, or if they want to engage with society the same way that men do, begin working the same way, join the processions. Okay, so let's look at the answers. Is that educated women face a decision about how to engage with existing institutions. I think this answer is alright. Face a decision, that is a main aspect of the passage, that there is a decision to make, and how to engage with existing institutions, those that men have been a part of. So I think that this choice is okay. Choice B, women can have positions of influence in English society only if they give up some of their traditional roles. This one's interesting. If we only read the first half of this answer, we might think it's correct. Why? Women can have positions of influence. Yeah, she did talk about that. She said women can have these positions of influence. But what's not true about this answer choice? If they give up some of their traditional roles. No, that was never talked about. She talked about those traditional roles, but there's never anything like, in order for us to, get these positions of influence, we have to give up these roles. In fact, she said that we're so used to doing these traditional roles and doing other things at the same time, like thinking while, rocking the cradle, stuff like that. So she did not talk about giving up their roles. She said we can have those positions of influence. So I actually don't like answer choice B. Choice C. The male monopoly on power in English society has grave and continuing effects. Oh boy. This answer is just not right. The male monopoly. First of all, that makes it sound like she was focusing a lot on the male's presence in English society, which is not true. She did mention male's presence, but it wasn't a point of focus of this passage. So already I don't really like C. And then grave and continuing effects. What are these effects? Even if this was the case, what are the grave and continuing effects? Well, from the passage, it's kind of hard to say. We might not have a great answer for that. And we could maybe stretch some things to fit this context of grave and continuing effects, but already at that point, we're really stretching to make this the correct answer, so I don't really like choice C. Choice D, the entry of educated women into positions of power traditionally held by men will transform these positions. Again, here, keywords will transform these positions. So that makes it sound like the central claim of this passage is that she is saying that if women get these same positions as men, the positions will change. They will be very different than how they're done right now with men. And that is not the case. That was not the central claim of the passage. It was more that women can get these positions. So with all of that said, the best answer is A. 34. Wolf uses the word we throughout the passage mainly to, well, it's a pretty good thing we paused when we saw the word we. We came across that pronoun, we didn't know who it was related to, so we paused and we figured it out. And what did we say? We said that we was probably referring to a group of English women. And yeah, so, but now we have to think, why did she use the word we? So let's think about it. So what is the author's purpose? She's trying to energize women. She's trying to persuade them to live a different lifestyle, perhaps a better lifestyle. So with that in mind, let's take a look at the answers. Choice A, mainly to reflect the growing friendliness among a group of people. I don't really like that answer. Growing friendliness. Was there ever much in the passage that talked about the friendliness of the women within their own society? Not really. So I don't feel too great about choice A, just because there's a lack of friendliness in the passage. B, to advance the need for candor amongst a group of people. Also, don't really feel too great about this answer. Advance the need for candor. Again, I didn't really get that sense throughout the passage. But let's take a look at the other answers. C, to establish a sense of solidarity among a group of people. Now, this one, it seems a little bit weird. Some people might have a negative connotation associated with the word solidarity. But in this case, it kind of makes sense. Why? Well, because she's trying to energize this group of women and showing how they are different than men and what they can be. So in this sense, I do think the word solidarity is good. And so far, I feel like that's the best answer. D, to reinforce the need for respect among a group of people. Respect. Was that ever really a focus of this passage? Was there any mention of it? No, not really. So we might be between B and C, but overall I think C is the better answer, just because the need for candor, that just wasn't really present too much in the passage. Alright, moving onwards. Alright, question 35. According to the passage, Wolf chooses the setting of the bridge because it... Okay, so it's a vague question for the most part. There could be a lot of different interpretations of the bridge, but it does say according to the passage, so that is prompting us to go back and take a look at, the passage. And so the passage talked about the bridge at the very beginning. So let's get a little idea of what's going on here. Close at hand is a bridge over the River Thames, an admirable vantage ground for us to make a survey. Then she describes the setting, the river, the city nearby. And then, let's see, 9 to 11, lines 9 to 11. Now we are here to consider facts. Now we must fix our eyes upon the procession of the sons of educated men. So she's set this picture. There is this bridge. It's a nice scenery. But from the bridge, we see this procession. Okay, so we get a little bit of idea of what's going on. Let's take a look at the answers. Since there are just 4 answers, there's less things to think about. Because it is conducive to a mood of fanciful reflection. Okay, I won't say too much about that. I think it's best to look at the other answer choices before eliminating anything. But I think the key word here is reflection. B, provides a good view of the procession of the sons of educated men. Isn't that interesting? We just said that we can see the procession from the bridge. So I feel like that's a pretty good answer. C, is within sight of historic episodes to which she alludes. I don't really think that answer makes any sense. Historic episodes? No, I don't really feel good about this answer. Maybe it's right, but compared to B, no, I feel like B is much better. D is symbolic of the legacy of past and present sons of educated men. Again, so this is the type of answer where maybe we can find some justification from it using our own assumptions, but it's very dangerous to make assumptions in the reading passage. So if we have to stretch to make an answer correct, it's probably not the right answer. And that's why A is also incorrect. Is conducive to a mood of fanciful reflection. We can maybe stretch some details to say that, yeah, because of these details, it is conducive to this mood, but it is quite stretching, and making these kind of assumptions is not safe. So that's why I think B is definitely the best answer, because it did say in the passage, and the keywords in the question are according to the passage. What did the passage say? It said that we can see the procession. Cool. Onwards. 36. Wolf indicates that the procession she describes in the passage... Okay. It's hard to answer this question without seeing the answer choices, so let's do that. So she describes in the passage, has come to have more practical influence in recent years. Alright, well, this one's a little tricky. Let's go back and look a little bit. What do we know about the procession? I believe she said it's been happening for the past 20 years or so. And that's right here, the past 20 years or so. And it is no longer a sight merely. So she said that it has happened for the past 20 years or so, but it still has been, part of the tradition. So We'll see, maybe it could be true. Practical influence. Influence is kind of a strange word to use here, but let's read the other answer choices. Maybe there's one that's better. She indicates that the procession she describes in the passage has become a celebrated feature of English public life. Ooh, okay. Well, that would require some assumptions to make. We didn't really talk too much about... We did talk about public life in England, the, divide between men and women, but was it a celebrated feature? A little bit? But I feel like how this answer is put together doesn't make sense in the context of the passage. So let's look at choice C. She describes in the passage includes all of the richest and most powerful men in England. We read that passage very carefully. We did not see, her focus on there being rich and powerful men. She did say that these men are well educated, but this was not very well stated in the passage, if at all. It could be true if we made some assumptions, but as I always say, that is not safe to do. So let's look at D. Has become less exclusionary in its membership in recent years. That's interesting. Why could this be the right answer? Because she said, I think if we remember correctly, she said that now we are a part of the procession. She's saying that women are now a part of the procession. So it has become less exclusionary because it used to be men, now there are women a part of it. So let's go with answer choice D. 37. Which choice provides the best evidence for the answer to the previous question? Okay, well, let's look at the answer choices. A is 12 to 17, B is 17 to 19. So 12 to 17. There they go, our brothers who have been educated at public schools and universities, mounting those steps, passing in and out of those doors, ascending those pulpits, preaching, teaching, administering justice, practicing medicine, transacting business, making money. So that's just talking about the brothers, though. That's just saying who's a part of the procession, the brothers, and what they're doing. So maybe, but I don't know. 17 to 19. It is a solemn sight always, a procession like a caravanserai crossing a desert. I don't think that provides support that the procession has become less exclusionary. It's describing the procession, but it doesn't say why it's become less exclusionary. Let's look at the other answers. 23 to 24 and 30 to 34. 23 to 24 is, for there, trapezing along at the tail end of the procession, we go ourselves. Oh, it's a great thing that we underlined this. We go ourselves. That's exactly what we referred to. We go ourselves. These women are a part of the procession now. It's become less exclusionary. So I feel really good about that answer. Let's look at the last one, 30 to 34. We too can leave the house, can mount those steps, pass in and out of those doors, make money, administer justice. We who now agitate these humble pens may in another century or two speak from a pulpit. So this one, we might think that that's also a good answer. But first of all, compared to C is saying exactly what we want. We go ourselves, part of the procession. But again, is this choice 30 to 34 saying how the procession has become less exclusionary? No, she's saying what we can do, things that could happen. It's not really too focused on the procession. Because of that, I'm going with choice C. Alright, couple more questions. Wolf characterizes the questions in line 53 to 57 as both. Okay, well, let's take a look at those lines. 53 to 57. Well, let's read a little bit before it, starting at line 49. The questions that we have to ask and to answer about that procession during this moment of transition are so important that they may well change the lives of all men and women forever. Okay, so that's urgency. For we have to ask ourselves here and now, do we wish to join that procession or don't we? On what terms shall we join that procession? Above all, where is it leading us, the procession of educated men? Those are the questions. The moment is short. It may last 5 years, 10 years, or perhaps only a matter of a few months longer. So they gave us the lines 53 to 57, but we read a little bit around it, and it's sandwiched between some sentences that stress the urgency of it. We have very little time, and then the moment is short. So, hopefully some of the answer choices talk about urgency. Let's take a peek. So she characterizes the questions as both controversial and threatening. Ooh. I don't think either of those adjectives do justice to the questions. Controversial, maybe for some, but not really. Threatening, that's the word I really don't like. Are they threatening at all? No, not really. B, weighty and unanswerable. No, in fact, the key word here is unanswerable. What does she say? She said that these questions need to be answered now. She's saying they must be answered, so they do most likely have an answer. So they wouldn't be unanswerable then. Anyways, choice C, momentous and pressing. That feels really good. Pressing, that's like a synonym for urgent. They need to be answered now. Momentous, she says that this can change men and women forever. I really like that answer. D, provocative and mysterious. Were these questions particularly mysterious? Maybe. But would that require us stretching our perception of the questions? Yes. Would that be making some assumptions? Yes. So we're not going to choose that answer. We're going with C. 39. Which choice provides the best evidence for the answer to the previous question? Okay, so we should be looking for lines that talk about the urgency of the questions. So let's take a look at the answers. A is 46 to 47, B is 48 to 49. So 46 to 47, oh, that's at the top. We are here on the bridge to ask ourselves certain questions. So that's just saying there are questions, right? But it doesn't describe what these questions are. 48 to 49, and they're very important questions, and we have very little time in which to answer them. Great. So, very little time in which to answer them, that supports our choice for the word pressing. Important questions, that supports the choice for momentous. So I really like that answer choice. And then I believe choice C was line 57. Let's take a look though. Yeah, the moment ... short, and then 62 is choice D. So 57 is just a short little bit. The moment is short. That does provide support that the questions are pressing, but it doesn't provide support for momentous. So this is not a good answer. And 62 is that excuse shall not serve you, madam. That doesn't relate to anything at all. That's talking about like the excuses that may be made. So with that said, the best choice is B. Okay, 40. Which choice most closely captures the meaning of the figurative sixpence referred to in lines 70 and 71? So we were a little bit confused about the sixpence the first time we heard it, but let's take a look at the answers. Tolerance, knowledge, opportunity, perspective. Okay, so we have these in mind. Let's take a look at line 70 to 71 and read a little bit around it. So, starting from 67, they have thought while they stirred the pot, while they rocked the cradle, it was thus that they won us the right to our brand new sixpence. It falls to us now to go on thinking, how are we to spend that sixpence? Think we must. Okay, so of the answer choices, which one do we think is good? Well, there is this sense of urgency, there's always that sense of urgency throughout, and we have a brand new sixpence. So what else is brand new in the context of this passage? Well, it's the opportunity to become a part of the procession, to get the same professions as men and that men have. So I'm starting to think that sixpence relates to the opportunity. How are we to spend this opportunity? To think. And what's the main point of this passage? She's convincing women to think about what are they going to do. So, with all of that said, choice C is opportunity. So I feel good about that. Let's just check the other answers. Choice A is tolerance. That doesn't make too much sense. B is knowledge. Was there any new knowledge in this passage that women got? No, not really, not in the traditional sense. D, perspective. Perhaps, the author is providing a new perspective, but it's the author providing that. Here, the sixpence, what is it being provided by? It was thus that they won us the right to our brand new sixpence. It falls to us now to go on thinking. I mean, the main thing here is she says it falls to us now. So she's a part of the people who gained this sixpence. So I don't feel good about perspective. I'm going with C. And last question. The range of places and occasions listed in lines 72 to 76 mainly serves to ... Okay, well, let's look at those lines 72 to 76. Let us think in offices and omnibuses while we are standing in the crowd watching coronations and Lord Mayor's shows. Let us think in the gallery of the House of Commons, in the law courts. Let us think at baptisms and marriages and funerals. Let us never cease from thinking, what is this civilization in which we find ourselves? Okay, we remember the author is always encouraging women to think, and she wants them to think about their role in society. So let's take a look at the answers. Mainly serves to emphasize how novel the challenge faced by women is. So the challenge might be novel, but would that be supported by mentioning, oh, we can think in the House of Commons, we can think at funerals? No, it's not good support for that answer choice. So A could be true, that the challenge is novel, but it's not true for this particular question, because we're seeing what do these lines support. B, to emphasize how pervasive the need for critical reflection is. Okay, I feel good about that. Women have to reflect on their role in society. They have to make the decision, what are they going to do? C, how complex the political and social issues of the day are. So I think the key word here is complex. So the social issues, political issues might relate to the divide of men and women, but are these examples of where they can think serving to show that they're complex in nature? No, not at all. They're showing that these are the places where we can think. It's not serving to any complexity in any sort of way. So I don't feel good about C. D, how enjoyable the career possibilities for women are. That would require an assumption. Yes, she did list out a lot of career possibilities, but it was never mentioned that these career possibilities are enjoyable. We could assume that women will find these enjoyable, but she doesn't ever say that. So we can't make that assumption. We cross out D, choose B, and that concludes the very, very challenging fourth reading passage. Okay, so now we'll do the last section, which in this case it's the debate section where we're given two passages. So my approach for this section, I still use the same approach as previous sections where I read both passages all at once and analyze everything and then go to the questions. But yeah, check out the other video in which I propose another technique that can be used for this particular passage. With that said, let's finish it off. Let's end this passage going out strong. And as always, we start with the little prologue. So passage 1 is adapted from Michael Slezak, Space Mining, The Next Gold Rush, 2013 by New Scientist. Passage 2 is from the editors of New Scientist, Taming the Final Frontier, 2013 by New Scientist. Okay, so we don't really get too much information about this, but passage 1 is probably talking about space mining, and it's called The Next Gold Rush. So maybe we think that passage 1 will have a good opinion on space mining and think that it's a good opportunity. But let us read to figure it out. Passage 1. Follow the money and you will end up in space. That's the message from a first-of-its-kind forum on mining beyond Earth. Convened in Sydney by the Australian Centre for Space Engineering Research, the event brought together mining companies, robotic experts, lunar scientists, and government agencies that are all working to make space mining a reality. Okay, we get a little bit of information here. It's sort of like describing this event that took place in Sydney, Australia about space mining. And I think the key thing is that the author mentions how it attracted a lot of different people. Mining companies, robotics experts, lunar scientists, and government agencies. So it attracted many different people from many different fields. Okay, let's continue. The forum comes hot on the heels of the 2012 unveiling of two private asteroid mining firms. Planetary Resources of Washington says it will launch its first prospecting telescopes in 2 years, while Deep Space Industries of Virginia hopes to be harvesting metals from asteroids by 2020. Another commercial venture that sprung up in 2012, Golden Spike of Colorado, will be offering trips to the moon, including to potential lunar miners. Okay, so here we learn that, asteroid mining has already gained some traction. In 2012, there are these two firms that have been established, the Planetary Resources of Washington, that's a pretty bad line, but yeah, there's that one, and Deep Space Industries of Virginia. So those are the two big ones, and then there's also the Golden Spike of Colorado. So there's already good traction, the firms are well established. And then we also get some information of what these firms intend to do in the area of asteroid mining in the near future. It will be launching its first prospective telescopes in 2 years, harvesting metals from asteroids by 2020, so we get an idea of what they're looking to do. And then this last one, Golden Spike, says that it'll be offering trips to the moon. So we can see with all these examples, the author seems to be quite exciting about this field of space mining and asteroid mining. Great, let's continue. Within a few decades, these firms may be meeting earthly demands for precious metals, such as platinum and gold, and the rare earth elements vital for personal electronics, such as yttrium and lanthanum. But like the gold rush pioneers who transformed the western United States, the first space miners won't just enrich themselves. They also hope to build an off-planet economy free of any bonds with Earth, in which the materials extracted and processed from the moon and asteroids are delivered for space-based projects. Okay, so what do we learn? We learn about the objectives of the ventures of space mining. Doing this will meet the earthly demands for precious metals. Platinum and gold are important. Rare earth elements, we can get those from the space mining. So that seems pretty cool. And, what else does it say? They also hope to build an off-planet economy. What does that mean? So some sort of economy that doesn't have any bonds with Earth, so something separate than the economy on Earth, and that's going to be used for space-based projects. Okay, so that's some good information. Can't gather too many conclusions, but we have some things that are, planted in our brain, some main topics of this passage. Continuing onwards, in this scenario, water mined from other worlds could become the most desired commodity. In the desert, what's worth more, a kilogram of gold or a kilogram of water? Asks Chris Zancy of Honey Bee Robotics in New York. Gold is useless. Water will let you live. Interesting. So this section is kind of emphasizing the importance of water, saying it could be the most desired commodity. And so this is like a positive consequence of space mining. They're saying that we will be able to get, water mined from other worlds, and that will help us, satisfy this most desired commodity. So another positive consequence of space mining. So the author does seem really in support of this venture. Next, water ice from the moon's poles could be sent to astronauts on the International Space Station for drinking or as a radiation shield. Splitting water into oxygen and hydrogen makes spacecraft fuel, so ice-rich asteroids could become interplanetary refueling stations. That's pretty cool. But anyways, what's going on here? The author is talking about water. What can it be used for? It gives many uses. It can be used for drinking, radiation shield, spacecraft fuel. So here it's really emphasizing that, okay, if we do the space mining, we can get water and it can be used for so many things. Drinking, radiation shield, spacecraft fuel. Awesome. That is pretty cool if you think about it. Anyways, onwards. Companies are eyeing the iron, silicon, and aluminum in lunar soil and asteroids, which could be used in 3D printers to make spare parts or machinery. Others want to turn space dirt into concrete for landing pads, shelters, and rocks. Okay, so now the author's not just talking about water. They're saying the other elements we can get. What can they be used for? 3D printers to make spare parts for machinery. We can get landing pads, shelters, and roads from these materials. And that's the end of the first passage. So what do we know? It seems that the author is really enthusiastic about this space mining. They're focusing on what things we can get out of it, the materials we can get, and how those materials can be used here on Earth for other things, as well as in space, the radiation shield for the ISS. So that's pretty exciting, and we do see that this author is quite excited about this. So good, just take a moment to pause, let everything from the first passage sink in, because now we have to consider passage 2, and this is a different author, perhaps different opinions, so we want to be critical and see what this author is saying. Passage 2. The motivation for deep space travel is shifting from discovery to economics. The past year has seen a flurry of proposals aimed at bringing celestial riches down to Earth. No doubt this will make a few billionaires even wealthier, but we all stand to gain. The mineral bounty and spin-off technologies could enrich us all. Okay, so what do we get from this little bit of information? We can see that the author's probably going to focus on the economics of this space mining, because that's presented in the first sentence. And they say that, okay, if we do this, it will make a few billionaires even wealthier. So that might be a turn-off to some people, but they say that we all stand to gain. So yeah, billionaires might get wealthier, but we can all benefit from this. And how are we going to benefit? From the spin-off technologies we can get and the mineral bounty. So they seem to be, somewhat excited that, okay, these are the potential benefits from space mining. We can all gain from it. So that's great. We're still not entirely clear on what the author's stance on this topic is. Why? Well, they do say that this billionaire is even wealthier, so that kind of seems like they're just including it to give the reader perspective on other consequences, not just the positives, unless that is a positive that the reader thinks is good. The billionaires get even wealthier. Okay, continuing on. But before the miners start firing up their rockets, we should pause for thought. At first glance, space mining seems to sidestep most environmental concerns. There is probably no life on asteroids, and thus no habitats to trash. But its consequences, both here on Earth and in space, merit careful consideration. Okay, so what are we getting from the author in this paragraph? There's a main thing that we need to get out of this section. And it's mentioned in the first and last lines. In the first line, they say, we must pause for thought. And in the last line, they say, merit careful consideration. So it seems that they're quite cautious about this space mining. They're encouraging people that we need to pause, and we have to carefully consider what's going on here. Why? Because there seem to be some concerns, and in this case, the author provided environmental concerns. And the author does bring up a good point that, there's probably not life on asteroids. It won't harm any habitats, but we need to be prepared for what are other consequences of space mining. We have to have careful consideration, and that's really what the author is encouraging here, to pause for thought. Okay, next. Part of this is about principles. Some will argue that space's magnificent desolation is not ours to despoil, just as they argue that our own planet's poles should remain pristine. Others will suggest that glutting ourselves on space's riches is not an acceptable alternative to developing more sustainable ways of earthly life. Okay, so now the author's focusing on principle. They propose a side to space mining by saying it's not in our position as humans to mess with space, and we should leave it how it is. The magnificent desolation is not ours to despoil. And then the author brings up another point, how there are other alternatives to space mining in order to live a better life here on Earth. More sustainable ways of earthly life. They're not neglecting that yet. They're saying there are still these options that we can do. So now you might be thinking, okay, is the author actually for space mining, or are they against it? We might be a little confused at this point. Also, what's something that caught me by surprise is they use the word glutting. We can't say too much about it, but it's definitely a really strange word choice by the author. Glutting. But anyways, we don't need to worry about that too much. Let's continue onwards. History suggests that those will be hard lines to hold, and it may be difficult to persuade the public that such barren environments are worth preserving. After all, they exist in vast abundance, and even fewer people will experience them than have walked through Antarctica's icy landscapes. Okay, so now the author kind of refutes the proposal that was brought up in the previous paragraph. They're saying that much of the public may disagree with those opinions due to the vastness of space and how so few people will experience space. So maybe they're saying, yeah, if space isn't ours to mess with, but if we do mess with it, there's no one else is really suffering from that because so few people go through space. There's more people that experience Antarctica's icy landscapes, which is already so few people. So that's sort of like a counter-argument. They're refuting that claim. So now again, we might be like, what is the author's stance on this? But maybe in these last few lines, it'll clarify. There's also the emerging off-world economy to consider. The resources that are valuable in orbit and beyond may be very different to those we prize on Earth. Questions of their stewardship have barely been broached, and the relevant legal and regulatory framework is fragmentary, to put it mildly. Wow. It may seem that these lines are just fine, but they're very, very important. First of all, it mentions an off-world economy. That should be sticking out to us because we said something about that in the first paragraph. So this is already a point of similarity between the two passages. So that should help us out in the questions that follow if we are comparing the passages in any way. But what else are they saying? They're saying that the resources that are available in orbit might be very different than the ones we prize on Earth. Well, that's different than the first passage, which talked about how they can be used for so many different things. Water was discussed, but also they said that we can use the materials for landing pads, and I think did they mention concrete? Oh, I don't even remember. If we scroll back up, we can see that it can be used for 3D printers, landing pads, shelters, and roads. So the first paragraph really talked about, these are the many places where we can use it. This passage is really saying that maybe we don't use them. Maybe they aren't needed here on Earth. What else is the author saying? The questions of their stewardship have barely been broached. And the regulatory framework is fragmentary, to put it mildly. Whoa, okay. So maybe they're trying to encourage us that these questions really need to be asked. We need to figure out what are these questions, what are the answers to them. Because the adjectives they use have barely been broached. It's fragmentary. It seems that the author is a little bit upset about this. They're not very pleased with the progress that is made thus far. But let's end this passage and see what the author says. Space miners, like their earthly counterparts, are often reluctant to engage with such questions. One speaker at last week's Space Mining Forum in Sydney, Australia, concluded with a plea that regulation should be avoided. But miners have much to gain from a broad agreement on the for-profit exploitation of space. Without consensus, claims will be disputed, investments risky, and the gains made insecure. It is in all of our long-term interests to seek one out. Okay, so the author concludes by explaining the little progress that has been made in the area of space mining. And they say that these space miners are often reluctant to engage with such questions. So they think that's an issue. They also mentioned a speaker said that regulation should be avoided, but they said that miners don't really share the same opinion. So there's like a lot of issues that the author is presenting us. And basically, what are they saying? They're saying, we need to figure out what's going on. We need consensus, because without consensus, we're going to make some really risky investments. So the author seems to be kind of afraid. And that's held throughout the passage. There were a lot of times where they seem quite reluctant. If we go back a couple of paragraphs, here we go. We must pause for thought, merit careful consideration. So the author seems quite wary about the current state of space mining, and they're encouraging further discussion to figure out what are these questions, engage with these questions. Awesome. Okay. So let us answer the questions now. I think we did a really good job of reading that passage. In lines 9 to 17, the author of passage 1 mentions several companies, primarily two. Okay, let's not yet look at the answers, but we should remember noting the companies that were brought up. There were a couple of companies that were formed in 2012 about space mining, if we remember, and that was like sort of to support the author's statement that like more firms have been established in the area of space mining, and so there's like interest in space mining. There are many projects that have been planned for the future, so that's something to keep in mind. Let's see what are our answer choices. So mention several companies primarily to note the technological advances that make space mining possible. Potentially, but it wasn't about making space mining possible, it was more that these companies are focusing on space mining. So I guess the passage wasn't talking about space mining as a possibility, it was more talking about what happens if we do follow through with space mining. So maybe not A. B, to provide evidence of the growing interest in space mining. Well, that seems like a much better answer. Why? Because that was the main point of that paragraph, right? If we go back here, the forum comes hot on the heels of a 2012 unveiling of two private asteroid mining firms. And we know that the author is quite excited about space mining. So it does seem like this is a pretty good answer. There is a growing interest. They're talking about these recent firms that were established. Let's look at C and D though, primarily to emphasize the large profits to be made from space mining. So they did bring up these companies, and we do normally relate companies with making profits, making monies, but the passage didn't really talk about the money that they're getting from this. It more focused on the projects of these companies. What are they planning to do, not the money. D, to highlight the diverse ways to carry out space mining operations. Not really. Again, it was just presenting the companies and talking about their projects, so I really think that B is the best answer. 43. The author of passage 1 indicates that space mining could have which positive effect? Okay, well, there were a lot of positive things that were talked about in space mining. But what are some things we remember? We should remember that the author talked about how there could be a lot of materials that we can gain, even like rare earth materials, and that can be used for like different technologies, so that was a positive effect. But there were a lot of positive effects, so let's just look at the answers. It could yield materials important to Earth's economy. That seems pretty good. There was a focus on materials, and there was a focus on the economy. I think it's a fine answer. Let's look at the other answer choices though. B, it could raise the value of some precious metals on Earth. So this answer does mention precious metals. However, the key word here is value. Did it really talk about the value, and did it have any sort of comparison? I mean, if the passage just did talk about raising the value, then perhaps there would have been some comparison, like this is the current value of the precious metals, but if we do space mining, then it would increase it to this value, and that didn't ever really occur, so I'm not cool with the answer choice B. C, it could create unanticipated technological innovations. Keyword here is unanticipated. Yes, but there is potential for technological innovations, definitely, and the author did talk about it. But were any of these unanticipated? No, because the author said that these are the potential. This is the possible progress that could be made in the world of technology. So, again, I don't really think that's a great answer. D, it could change scientists' understanding of space resources. This could be true, but it would require to make us an assumption. And it wasn't really talked about too much in the passage, and we don't like making assumptions. A was a really good answer, so we're going with A. 44. Which choice provides the best evidence for the answer to the previous question? Okay, well, let's take a look at the answer choices. 18 to 22 and 24 to 28. Within a few decades, these firms may be meeting earthly demands for precious metals such as platinum and gold, and the rare earth elements vital for personal electronics such as yttrium and lanthanum. Okay, that seems pretty good. Earthly demands, that relates somewhat to the economy, and talking about these precious materials, I feel pretty good about that answer. Okay, so I think answer choice B was 24 to 28. So they also hope to build an off-planet economy free of any bonds with Earth, in which the materials extracted and processed from the moon and asteroids are delivered for space-based projects. Okay, so they do talk about the economy a little bit, but this is the off-planet economy. And it's not really focusing too much on the materials. It's just saying that these materials can be sent for space-based projects. So the focus is a little bit there, but it doesn't support the previous answer. You know, it's not saying it could yield materials important to Earth's economy, right? It was talking about the off-Earth economy. Okay, C is 29 to 30 and D is 41 to 44. So C, in this scenario, water mined from other worlds could become the most desired commodity. So this is just focusing on water and saying that it could become high in demand. So it somewhat supports the previous answer, but it does require a lot of extra thinking. That water is, yes, it's a material, and then most desired commodity, yes, that kind of relates to demand, and that kind of fits in the place of an economy, but still, it's a stretch. Maybe some assumptions required. I don't feel too good about it. D, 41 to 44, companies are eyeing the iron, silicon, and aluminum in lunar soil and asteroids, which could be used in 3D printers to make spare parts or machinery. Others want to turn space dirt into concrete for landing pads, shelters, and roads. Okay, so that one's interesting. So that is talking only about the materials and what they could be used for, and companies' intentions of using those materials. It doesn't focus as much on the economy, and it focuses more on the company's use of the materials. So, with that said, we're going to go with choice A because it mentions the material and relates it to the economy, which is what our answer choice for 43 said. Cool. 45. As used in line 19, demands most nearly means, okay, well, let's go back to line 19. And we'll read the sentence. Within a few decades, these firms may be meeting earthly demands for precious metals such as platinum and gold, and the rare earth elements vital for personal electronics such as yttrium and lanthanum. I feel like I've read that sentence like 4 times at this point. But we can sort of predict what the answer is. And in this context, we can create some synonyms, like meeting earthly wishes or the earthly needs, some sort of wants. That's the kind of word we're looking for. So let's look at the answer choices. Means offers? No. Claims? Maybe. Inquiries? Not really. D, desires? So yeah, after reading those 4, it should be quite clear that D is very close to what we predicted. So we're going to go with answer choice D. Cool. We're nearing the end here. 46. What function does the discussion of water in lines 35 to 40 serve? Okay, so we did take note of this. And before the section, there was some quote by some person, and they praise like the importance of water. It could be the most desired commodity. We just read that. So let's take a look at the lines quickly, 35 to 40. And this is talking about what water can be used for. It can be used for drinking on the ISS, the radiation shield. It can be used for spacecraft fuel. Great. So the lines are sandwiched between how water can be the most desired commodity. And I think that's going to be something important for us to keep in mind. So let's take a look at what the answers say. A, it continues an extended comparison that begins in the previous paragraph. Okay, maybe, but what is the comparison? Let's figure that out. In the previous paragraph, this Chris Zachney, or however you pronounce it, compares a kilogram of gold to a kilogram of water. So that's the comparison being made, but the lines in question 35 to 40 are not furthering that comparison. They're talking only about water. So that comparison was only made in the previous paragraph. I don't feel good about choice A. B, it provides an unexpected answer to a question raised in the previous paragraph. Well, what's the question? It's the same comparison between the gold and water. What's worth more? And in a way, you can think that these lines 35 to 40 are answering that. But really, the answer is already given. It says gold is useless, water will let you live, and then the lines tell us how water can be used. So I don't feel good about that either. C, it offers hypothetical examples supporting a claim made in the previous paragraph. Okay, what's the claim? Well, the claim is that water could be the most desired commodity, and now it's providing examples of why it could be that most desired commodity because it has so many different uses. So I feel good about C. D, it examines possible outcomes of a proposal put forth in the previous paragraph. We don't even have to go back to that. Potential outcomes? No, there weren't any outcomes. It was just what water can be used for, and then the outcomes would occur after the usage of water. So with that said, C feels really good. So 47. The central claim of passage 2 is that space mining has positive potential, but, okay, well, this is really good because when we summarized passage 2, we said that the author feels pretty good about space mining, but, well, what were they concerned about? They were concerned about the economics of the situation, and they were also concerned that we haven't done enough discussion, we haven't done much consideration of these large questions. They were very skeptical of this, they were very cautious. So that's something to really keep in mind. They wanted to do more consideration before making these large decisions. So let's see what the answer choices say. Has positive potential, but it will end up encouraging humanity's reckless treatment of the environment. not really. The environment was just very briefly mentioned, maybe a couple of sentences. It wasn't the central claim of the passage, but maybe. Let's look at the other answers. Its effects should be thoughtfully considered before it becomes a reality. Yes, this is what we said. This is a very good answer as to what we predicted, so I feel good about that. Let's read the other two. But such potential may not include replenishing key resources that are disappearing on Earth. No, that wasn't the central claim. Maybe it was briefly mentioned, but it wasn't the main focus of the paragraph, or of the passage. But experts disagree about the commercial viability of the discoveries it could yield. Commercial viability, not the main focus. B is what we said the answer was, and it feels really good. 48. As used in line 68, hold most nearly means, well, let's look at 68. History suggests that those will be hard lines to hold, and it may be difficult to persuade the public that such barren environments are worth preserving. Okay, so we have to do a little bit more. We can't just read the sentence, because the sentence says that those will be hard lines to hold. What are the hard lines? Like, what are those? What are those? But that's referring to the previous paragraph about, not messing with the environment of space. So what are some possible synonyms? I'm thinking to follow or maintain, because these environment stipulations are like guidelines, and you want to follow guidelines, maintain guidelines. So I feel like those are pretty good synonyms. Let's take a look at what the answers say. A, maintain. Wait, didn't I just say maintain? Okay, so I feel pretty good about A. Grip? No, grip is more of like a physical grip. You grip something with your hand. Restrain? No, that means to hold back, so not really. Withstand? Maybe that means to hold up, but since I literally said the word maintain, I'm going with that. Alright, the final four. Which statement best describes the relationship between the passages? Okay, we can try to answer this without looking at it, just get some ideas. So passage 1 focused on the potentials of space mining and the work that's being put into it right now. They mentioned the companies, and they talked about the materials we can get, what it can be used for. Passage 2 spoke a little bit about the greatness of space mining, but it focused on how we have to have careful consideration right now. We have to have more discussion on it. Let's take a look at what the answers suggest. Passage 2 refutes the central claim advanced in Passage 1. No, not really. Passage 1 was very, gung-ho about space mining, but Passage 2 wasn't like, no, space mining bad. They seemed a little bit enthusiastic. So, probably not A. B. Passage 2 illustrates the phenomenon described in more general terms in Passage 1. No, not really. What phenomenon? And in more general terms? No, that would almost be like Passage 2 would be very similar to Passage 1, but they were still very different because they focus on two different things. One was talking about the greatness, the other was talking about careful consideration needed. So they weren't extremely similar, so maybe not B. C. Passage 2 argues against the practicality of the proposals put forth in Passage 1. Okay, so this one seems correct, but I think the key word here is practicality, right? The author never said that space mining is impractical in any way. Maybe they did talk about the proposals put forth in Passage 1, there was some overlap, and maybe Passage 2 didn't always agree with Passage 1, but they never focus on the practicality. That's really the key word here, so I don't really like that either, but maybe, let's take a look at D first. Passage 2 expresses reservations about developments discussed in Passage 1. That's what we were looking for, reservations. Keyword, Passage 2, they were a little bit more skeptical. They wanted more discussion. They didn't want to go all in on space mining right away. D seems like the best answer. 50. The author of Passage 2 would most likely respond to the discussion of the future of space mining in lines 18 to 28, Passage 1, By claiming that such a future, okay, let's go back to 18 to 28. I will not read it out loud, we'll just think about what it said. So here it's talking about how the firms, these firms may be meeting earthly demands for precious metals, they can be used for personal electronics, the first space miners won't just enrich themselves. Off-planet economy, we underlined that, and that was mentioned in the second paragraph. So let's go to the second passage. Sorry, I meant to say the second passage. And we see here the off-world economy is mentioned. So what does this author say? They say that the resources that are valuable in orbit may be very different than the ones we prize on Earth. So that's the second author's opinion of this off-world economy. So with that said, let's see what the answers are. So by claiming that such a future is inconsistent with the sustainable use of space resources, okay, B, will be difficult to bring about in the absence of regulations. Okay, we didn't really think about this when reading this question, but this feels like a good answer because the author of passage 2 was focused on regulations, and we do need some regulations. We do need to figure out what's going on, answer these big questions. So I do like choice B. C, cannot be attained without technologies that do not exist yet. Not really. No, I don't think the author really focused on that at all. And D, seems certain to affect Earth's economy in a negative way. Potentially. They did say that, well, here, potentially, but it's wrong. Why? Seems certain to affect in a negative way. The only support we could find is that the author said that the resources we come across may not be useful on Earth. So when they say may not, it's not certain. And just because they're not useful on Earth doesn't mean that it affects Earth's economy negatively. Earth's economy might just stay the same. So I don't think D is correct. That leaves us with choice B. Last two questions. Which choice provides the best evidence for the answer to the previous question? So we were talking about regulations. We should be looking for an answer, some lines that talk about regulations. So 60 to 63 and then 74 to 76. 60 to 63. Part of this is about principle. Some will argue that space's magnificent desolation is not ours to despoil, just as they argue that our own planet's poles should remain pristine. That's talking about the not the economy. So that's talking about the environment. Not really about regulations, so probably not. 74 to 76. There's also the emerging off-world economy to consider. The resources that are valuable in orbit and beyond may be very different to those that we prize on Earth. So it's actually just the second sentence, not the first one that I read. And so that's talking about the resources, right? They might not be, useful here on Earth, but again, that doesn't talk about regulations. So let's look at the last two, 81 to 83 and 85 to 87. 81 to 83. One speaker at last week's space mining forum in Sydney, Australia, concluded with a plea that regulation should be avoided. Okay, so it is talking about regulation, but here it's saying regulation should be avoided. Interesting. Let's look at D. Without consensus, claims will be disputed, investments risky, and the gains made insecure. Okay, so what are we thinking? Well, without consensus, it is talking about consensus is needed, and it's talking about the regulations. So with that said, I'm going to go with choice D because C was talking about the objection to regulations. So D seems like our best answer. And finally, the last question. Which point about the resources that will be highly valued in space is implicit in passage 1 and explicit in passage 2? So it's really helpful for this question to cover the answers, so that way we can think about it beforehand. So what is something that was explicitly mentioned in passage 2? And we remember that the second passage mentioned that the materials we gain from space mining might not be the ones we need on Earth. In passage 1, they said that, okay, it could be used on Earth, but if not, we can establish an off-world economy. So those are some things to keep in mind. They may be different from those that are valuable on Earth. Absolutely. That was absolutely explicitly mentioned in passage 2, and the off-world economy suggests that the resources that would establish that economy aren't used on Earth, right? Because if they're not used on Earth, they must go to the off-world economy. Otherwise, we would use those resources on Earth. B, they will be valuable only if they can be harvested cheaply. Again, passage 2 kind of was focused on the economy, but didn't really have too much about how to harvest them, the expenses of harvesting, so I don't feel good about B. They're likely to be primarily precious metals and rare earth elements. I think that was explicitly mentioned in passage 1, if I'm remembering correctly. Precious metals, rare earth elements. So yeah, since that was explicitly mentioned in passage 1, and this is asking for an implicit, that's wrong. And D, they may increase in value as those same resources become rare on Earth. Again, a mention of value kind of discussed, but an increase wasn't really discussed. Don't feel good about D. That means I will be going with answer choice A. Alright, so that includes the reading section. A very, very long section, and this is a very long video, I understand, but hopefully you have been able to get a lot of insight into how to approach this reading section. Hopefully me talking things out gives you an idea of what things you should be looking for, where you should be stopping in each passage, how you should be reviewing what you have read. And yeah, so that's the end of this section, and in another video I'll have the writing and math sections for this same practice test. Okay, thank you so much for watching, and until next time.